I am Chloe, 35 years old, and the founder of a corporate logistics firm that quietly funded my entire family's lavish lifestyle. Last Thanksgiving, I sat at the head of my own custom mahogany dining table inside my sprawling Atlanta estate, listening to my stepdaughter call me a maid. When I looked to my husband for defense, he simply laughed, wiped his mouth, and told me to grab a towel. That was the exact moment my marriage died. I did not yell. I just smiled, dropped my house keys onto her plate, and walked out to let financial reality handle the rest. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to evict toxic people from a life you built with your own two hands. The evening was supposed to be a flawless celebration of family and gratitude. I had hired a private chef to cater a 5-course dinner so I could finally relax after a grueling 80-hour workweek negotiating international shipping contracts. The crystal glasses gleamed under the warm glow of the imported chandelier. The rich scent of roasted lamb, garlic, and rosemary filled the air of our massive 6-bedroom home. From the outside, anyone looking through our grand bay windows would see a picture-perfect, affluent Black family living the ultimate American dream. But inside those walls, the air was thick with resentment and unearned entitlement. I sat at the head of the table in a stunning emerald silk dress, completely exhausted in every sense of the word. I was physically drained from running an empire, but more profoundly, I was emotionally starved by the very people who happily consumed the fruits of my labor. At the opposite end of the long table sat Julian, my husband of 3 years. Julian was 40 years old, handsome, charismatic, and deeply invested in projecting the image of a traditional wealthy provider to his fraternity brothers and our upscale neighbors. He loved the country club memberships, the tailored suits, and the luxury cars. The truth, however, was a heavy secret I had kept buried to protect his fragile male pride. His consulting business had been failing for years, and my logistics company was the sole engine keeping his extravagant lifestyle afloat. I was the silent foundation of his kingdom, yet at this table I was treated like a nuisance. To Julian's right sat his brother Dayon and Dion's wife Heather. Heather was a woman who had thoroughly mastered the art of delivering devastating insults wrapped in dripping Southern sweetness. As the private chef quietly cleared the salad plates, Heather took a slow, deliberate sip of her Cabernet Sauvignon and fixed her pale eyes on me. She tilted her head, adopting a look of faux concern that instantly made my blood boil. "You know, Chloe?" She began, her voice loud enough to ensure it silenced the ambient music in the room. "I was just reading a fascinating article about how women with highly demanding corporate jobs often struggle to maintain a soft feminine presence at home. Running a logistics company just seems so terribly masculine and rough. Do you ever worry that your aggressive work schedule is ruining the family dynamic? It must be so incredibly hard for Julian to feel like the true man of the house when you are always operating in boss mode." I gripped my heavy linen napkin under the table, my knuckles turning white. Heather loved dropping these calculating microaggressions. She loved trying to police my tone and my ambition, masking her deep-seated jealousy as traditional family values. I looked over at Julian, fully expecting him to immediately shut down his sister-in-law. I waited for him to proudly state that my so-called aggressive schedule was the exact reason this family flew first class to the Bahamas every summer and lived in a gated community. Instead, Julian casually cut a piece of lamb, chewed it slowly, and nodded in agreement with Heather. He actually nodded. He told Heather that it was definitely a constant struggle, but that he was doing his absolute best to lead the household and keep me grounded. The sheer audacity of his lie physically knocked the wind out of me. I was the one keeping this entire family grounded by quietly paying the mortgage, his luxury car note, and the exorbitant credit card bills he racked up trying to look wealthy to his friends. Before I could even formulate a verbal response to Julian's staggering betrayal, the disrespect escalated to a level I never thought possible. Sitting directly to my left was Brielle, Julian's 19-year-old daughter from a previous marriage. Brielle had always resented my presence, viewing me not as a stepmother or a mentor, but as an unlimited ATM machine standing in the way of her having her father all to herself. She was sitting there wearing a designer dress that I had purchased, typing furiously on an expensive smartphone that I paid the monthly bill for. She looked up from her glowing screen, her face twisted into a sneer of pure, unadulterated contempt. She reached for her heavy crystal glass filled to the brim with sticky, sparkling apple cider. She did not accidentally bump it. She did not casually brush against it. I watched her hand wrap firmly around the cut crystal lock, her eyes dead onto mine, and deliberately shove the glass forward. The glass tipped over with a loud, violent clatter. The dark amber liquid surged across the pristine white tablecloth like a wave and cascaded directly onto my lap. The cold, sticky cider soaked instantly through my expensive emerald silk dress, clinging uncomfortably to my skin and ruining the fabric completely. Shocked gasps echoed around the table from Dion and the chef, but Brielle did not even flinch. She leaned back in her plush dining chair, crossed her arms over her chest, and stared me dead in the eye with a look of absolute triumph. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with venom and entitlement, "fetch a towel. That is what the maid is for, right?" The massive dining room fell completely agonizingly silent. The only sound in the entire house was the sticky cider dripping off the edge of the mahogany table and splashing onto the polished hardwood floor. I slowly turned my head to look down the length of the table at my husband. This was his flesh and blood. This was his 19-year-old daughter calling his wife a maid in her own home. This was the ultimate line, crossed, a boundary shattered beyond repair. I sat perfectly still, waiting for the inevitable explosion. I waited for Julian to slam his fist on the table, demand immediate respect for his wife, and fiercely discipline his entitled child. I waited for the man I married to finally show up and protect my honor. But Julian did not stand up. He did not raise his voice. He did not reprimand Brielle in the slightest. Instead, a slow, incredibly amused smirk spread across his handsome face. He let out a soft, dismissive chuckle that echoed loudly in the quiet, tense room. It was a laugh that validated her disrespect, a laugh that told everyone at the table that my humiliation was merely entertainment. He reached for his cloth napkin, wiped his mouth casually, and looked at me with an expression of supreme annoyance. "Come on, Chloe." Julian sighed, rolling his eyes dramatically as if I were a child ruining a perfect evening. "Do not give us that attitude tonight. Just clean it up so we can eat in peace." I did not move a single muscle. I just sat there in the head of the table, the freezing cider seeping through the thin silk of my dress and turning cold against my skin. I stared directly into the eyes of the man I had vowed to love and cherish. The silence in the dining room stretched until it felt like a massive physical weight pressing down on my chest. I waited for Julian to realize the magnitude of what had just happened. I waited for a flicker of regret, or even basic human decency to cross his face, but his amused smirk remained perfectly intact. Then came the voice I had learned to dread more than any other in this world. Mama Estelle, Julian's mother, sat 2 seats away to my right. She was dressed in a tailored lavender suit, her hair perfectly coiffed, wearing an expression of profound and theatrical disappointment. She placed her heavy silver fork down with a sharp clink against the porcelain plate. "Chloe, you really need to learn how to pick your battles," Estelle said, her voice dripping with that particular brand of condescension reserved entirely for me. "My son asked you a simple question. He asked you to clean up a little spill so we can all continue this beautiful Thanksgiving dinner. Is it really that difficult to just swallow your pride for one single evening?" I turned my gaze to Estelle, my face a carefully constructed mask of calm. Estelle leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table I had imported from France. "Julian works himself to the bone to be a traditional black provider for this family. He pays the exorbitant mortgage on this beautiful 6-bedroom estate so you can have a luxurious roof over your head. He puts this gourmet food on this table. He ensures you never have to want for anything. He bought you that designer dress you are wearing right now. The least you can do, the absolute bare minimum, is be a submissive and supportive wife when his daughter makes a tiny little mistake. A traditional provider. The words echoed loudly in my mind, almost making me laugh out loud right there in the dining room. If Estelle only knew the truth. If she only knew that the traditional provider she worshipped was currently $50,000 in debt to a private lender. If she only knew that his so-called successful consulting firm had not turned a profit in over 2 years. If she only knew that the beautiful estate she was sitting in, the luxury cars parked in the driveway, and the very dress she claimed he bought me were all funded entirely by my corporate logistics firm. But I did not say a word. I let her keep digging her grave. When Julian met you, Estelle continued, her tone growing even more self-righteous. You were just starting that little shipping business of yours. You were struggling. He elevated you. He brought you into a respectable, established family. You should be waking up every single morning thanking God that a man of his incredible stature and wealth chose to settle down with you. That little shipping business. I thought about the countless nights I slept on the cold concrete floor of my first warehouse. I thought about the grueling 80-hour work weeks, the relentless negotiations for international freight lanes, and the sheer willpower it took to build my company into a massive enterprise. I built an empire from the ground up, while Julian spent his afternoons playing golf at the country club and buying custom-tailored suits on my dime. Yet in this room, my life's work was reduced to a little side project that Julian supposedly rescued me from. Heather, never one to miss an opportunity to punch down, eagerly jumped into the conversation. She swirled the expensive wine in her glass, a knowing and deeply sympathetic smile plastered on her thin lips. You know, Estelle is absolutely right, Heather chimed in, her voice artificially sweet and heavily laced with faux concern. I actually read a really fascinating sociological study just last month. It talked about how women of color, especially those who try to adopt masculine leadership roles in the workplace, just do not know how to soften up for their husbands behind closed doors. Heather looked at me with an expression of fake pity that made my stomach churn. It is a real cultural issue, Chloe. You are so used to fighting and being aggressive out in the corporate world that you bring that same harsh, unyielding energy into your marriage. You simply do not know how to yield to male authority. Julian is a strong, successful man. He needs a soft, feminine place to land at the end of the day, not another boardroom battle. You really should consider taking a step back from your company. Maybe take some etiquette classes, learn how to nurture. You cannot expect Brielle to respect you when you constantly project such hostile masculine energy. Dion, Julian's brother, grunted in agreement as he took a long sip of his bourbon. Heather is right, bro, Dion said, pointing his glass at Julian. You let her wear the pants way too much. You have to assert dominance in your own house, or she is going to keep disrespecting Brielle and embarrassing you in front of your family. I looked around the massive dining table. They were all nodding. They had seamlessly formed a unified front against me. In their eyes, I was nothing more than a lucky charity case. I was a bitter, overly aggressive, and deeply ungrateful woman who was ruining a picture-perfect family dinner simply because I refused to wipe up a sticky mess intentionally thrown on me by a spoiled teenager. They sat in the very velvet chairs I bought, eating the expensive catered food I paid for, drinking the vintage Italian wine I had shipped overseas, all while lecturing me on my lack of grace and submissiveness. They were completely blinded by their own arrogance and the fake reality Julian had constructed for them. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not throw my ruined napkin across the room or scream the undeniable truth at the top of my lungs. Years of negotiating ruthless corporate contracts with powerful executives had taught me one universal truth. The loudest person in the room is always the weakest. True power does not need to shout to be heard. True power simply acts. I sat perfectly still, absorbing every single word of their delusional superiority. I committed the incredibly smug, triumphant look on Brielle's young face to memory. I memorized the condescending, racist tone of Heather's voice and the self-righteous, judgmental glare from Mama Estelle. Most importantly, I burned the image of Julian's cowardly, deeply amused smirk into the deepest part of my brain. I watched him bask in the adoration of his mother and the validation of his brother, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire kingdom was built entirely on my back. They thought they had won. They truly believed they had successfully put me in my place and reminded me of my supposedly lower status in the family hierarchy. They expected me to lower my head in shame, apologize to everyone for my bad attitude, and walk quietly into the kitchen to grab a damp towel. They expected the maid to do her job and clean up the mess. They had absolutely no idea that I was already mentally calculating the total sum of their financial destruction. I placed my hands flat against the polished mahogany table and pushed my chair back. The heavy wood scraped loudly against the floorboards. Every pair of eyes in the room instantly locked onto me. Brielle smirked confidently, clearly assuming her little stunt had worked and that I was finally getting up to fetch the towel. Mama Estelle nodded in stern approval, taking a slow sip of her ice water, as if order had finally been restored to the universe. Even Julian relaxed his broad shoulders, picking up his silver fork again to resume eating his meal. They all fully expected me to walk quietly into the kitchen, grab a sponge and scrub the cider out of the expensive rug while they enjoyed their lamb. But I did not walk toward the kitchen. I did not move to grab a single cleaning supply. Instead, I stood at my full height at the head of the table. I looked down at the ruined silk of my emerald dress, reached for my thick linen napkin, and methodically dabbed at the sticky cider. I took my time. I let the agonizing silence stretch out for another 10 seconds. I could see the confusion starting to ripple across Dion and Heather's faces. This was not the submissive, defeated reaction they had anticipated. Once I was satisfied that the worst of the spill was contained, I tossed the stained napkin carelessly onto the center of the table. I reached down to the floor and picked up my heavy leather designer handbag. The soft click of the golden clasp opening echoed like a gunshot in the quiet dining room. I reached inside and wrapped my fingers around the cold metal of my house keys. It was a large keyring, heavy with the keys to the front door, the security gates, the 3-car garage, and the wine cellar. These were the literal keys to the kingdom they all firmly believed belonged entirely to Julian. I walked slowly around the edge of the table, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I stopped right behind Brielle's chair. She stiffened immediately, her smug smile faltering just a fraction as my shadow fell over her. I leaned in close, letting the heavy keyring dangle just inches from her face. Then I opened my hand and let go. The thick cluster of metal keys dropped straight down and crashed violently into Brielle's porcelain plate. The sudden impact sent pieces of her roasted lamb and mashed potatoes flying across the pristine white tablecloth. Brielle shrieked and shoved her chair back, staring wide-eyed at the messy pile of keys sitting directly in her gravy. "What on earth is wrong with you?" Julian finally snapped, his voice rising in genuine anger as he half stood from his chair. I ignored him completely. I kept my eyes locked onto Brielle's shocked, furious face. "You are absolutely right, Brielle," I said, my voice eerily calm and steady in the tense room. "I am not the lady of this house. This is Julian's house. You are the princess of this magnificent castle. So since I am just the maid, I am officially resigning my position. And since this is your domain, I wish you the absolute best of luck paying the $12,500 mortgage on the first of the month." The collective gasp that sucked the air out of the dining room was almost musical. Heather's mouth fell open in an ungraceful, gaping circle, her wine glass hovering forgotten in the air. Mama Estelle gripped the edge of the table, her eyes darting frantically between me and her son. $12,000, Dion repeated under his breath, looking at Julian in sheer disbelief. I did not wait for Julian to formulate a desperate lie to save his face in front of his family. I turned on my heel and walked purposefully toward the grand foyer. I pulled my heavy cashmere winter coat from the hall closet and slipped it over my shoulders. The thick oak front door was just steps away. "Chloe? Get back here right now!" Julian roared. His heavy footsteps pounded against the floorboards as he chased after me. He stopped at the edge of the foyer, his face flushed with a mixture of blistering rage and sudden creeping panic. "You think this is funny? You think you can just throw a tantrum and walk out on your family. You walk out that door and you are done. Do you hear me? You will be back begging on your knees by tomorrow morning when you realize how good you have it here. I placed my hand on the cold brass handle of the front door. I looked back at him one last time. He was puffing his chest out, trying desperately to look like the powerful, untouchable patriarch in front of his silent audience in the dining room. I looked at the man who had secretly drained my accounts, lied to his family, and allowed his daughter to treat me like garbage. I did not feel an ounce of sadness. I did not feel any heartbreak or regret. All I felt was the incredibly intoxicating rush of absolute freedom. "Keep the cider, Brielle," I called out over his shoulder. I opened the heavy door, stepped out into the freezing November night air, and pulled it shut behind me with a resounding, finalizing thud. The cold wind whipped across my face, but I had never felt warmer. I walked down the long, sweeping driveway toward my waiting car, leaving the fake king completely stranded in a castle he could not afford to keep. The war had officially begun, and I already knew exactly how I was going to win it. The drive down the highway toward Midtown Atlanta was the quietest 30 minutes I had experienced in 3 entire years. I kept the radio off, letting the steady hum of my car engine be the only sound in the dark cabin. The heater blew warm air against my cold skin, slowly thawing the chill from the spilled cider and the freezing November wind. As I watched the city skyline grow larger through my windshield, a profound sense of clarity washed over me. I did not feel the typical panic of a wife walking out on her marriage. I did not feel the urge to pull the car over and cry into my steering wheel. Instead, every breath I took felt lighter, as if a massive, suffocating weight had just been physically lifted from my lungs. I pulled up to the brightly lit entrance of the Four Seasons. The valet promptly opened my door, offering a warm smile that felt entirely alien after the hostility I had just escaped. I handed him my keys, walked through the opulent marble lobby, and swiped my credit card at the front desk to book their premier penthouse suite for the week. I did not care about the exorbitant nightly rate. For the first time in my marriage, I was spending my hard-earned money entirely on my own peace of mind. The moment the heavy wooden door of the penthouse clicked shut behind me, the silence of the room was shattered by the relentless buzzing of my smartphone. I dropped my designer bag onto the plush king-sized bed and pulled the phone from my coat pocket. The screen was completely flooded with notifications. Julian was rapidly firing off text messages, his tone swinging wildly between arrogant commands and manipulative gaslighting. "Chloe, you are making an absolute fool of yourself," the first message read. "Turn that car around and come home right now before you ruin Thanksgiving completely." A minute later, another text arrived. "You are overreacting over a simple accident. You are embarrassing me in front of my family. I expect you back in this house in 20 minutes, or there will be serious consequences." I swiped his messages away without replying, only to see a long, meticulously punctuated paragraph from Heather. "Chloe, your behavior tonight was completely unacceptable," she wrote. "Brielle is deeply traumatized by your sudden outburst and your aggressive departure. We are all praying for you to find some humility. You need to come back, apologize to my niece, and ask your husband for forgiveness before you permanently damage your marriage. Traumatized." The word actually made me laugh out loud in the empty hotel room. Brielle was not traumatized. She was annoyed that her human punching bag had finally decided to hit back. I walked over to the mahogany desk situated by the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the glittering lights of the city I had conquered. I turned my phone on silent, flipped it face down on the desk, and pulled my sleek MacBook Pro out of my bag. It was time to stop being the submissive wife and step fully back into my role as the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Logistics. I opened the laptop, the bright screen illuminating the dark room. I logged directly into my secure corporate banking portal, bypassing the small personal checking account Julian thought was my only source of income. For 3 grueling years, I had carefully managed an intricate web of finances to protect Julian's fragile male ego. When we first married, he paraded around as a highly successful consultant, dripping in designer clothes and talking a big game about building generational wealth. It took me less than 6 months to discover that his business was completely underwater, drowning in secret loans and past due notices. Instead of leaving him, I did what so many successful women are conditioned to do. I shrank myself to make him look bigger. I quietly paid off his debts using my corporate dividends. When he wanted to buy a massive estate to show off to his fraternity brothers, I purchased the 6-bedroom house in cash through my logistics company, Apex LLC, and simply let him tell his mother and his friends that he secured the mortgage. I became the silent, invisible engine powering his entire fake reality, all because society constantly whispered that a powerful Black woman still needed a traditional male provider at the head of her table to be respectable. That protection ended tonight. I navigated to the Authorized Users tab on my Platinum Corporate American Express account. Julian had been swiping this card for 2 years to pay for his expensive golf club memberships, his tailored suits, and lavish business lunches that never resulted in any actual clients. I clicked his name, hit the Revoke Access button, and watched his profile vanish from the screen. With one single click, I completely severed his primary lifeline to the wealthy lifestyle he loved to flaunt. Next, I opened the automated payments directory. I found the recurring monthly wire transfer of $12,500 labeled Estate Escrow. Julian firmly believed that this money was automatically drafted from his own failing business account, completely ignoring the fact that I transferred the exact amount into his account 3 days prior every single month. I deleted the recurring transfer. The first of the month was exactly 4 days away. The bank was going to hit his empty account for the mortgage, and it was going to bounce so hard it would shatter his perfect facade. I did not stop there. I found the lease agreement for the brand new Mercedes-Benz S-Class sitting in the driveway of the estate. Julian loved driving that car to family events, rolling the windows down so everyone could see him behind the leather steering wheel. I canceled the auto draft for the monthly payment. Then I pulled up the financial portal for Brielle's expensive out-of-state private university. Julian had promised his ex-wife he would cover the tuition in full, a promise he made entirely with my wallet. I logged into the university billing portal and canceled the upcoming semester's wire transfer, leaving a balance of $28,000 completely unpaid. I sat back in the ergonomic leather chair, the glow of the laptop screen reflecting in my eyes. The methodical execution of revoking my financial support felt better than any therapy session I had ever attended. I looked out at the sprawling city below me. I remembered the early days of Apex Logistics, sleeping on the cold concrete floors of my first warehouse, battling predatory shipping vendors, and working until my eyes physically burned just to secure my first major corporate contract. I built an empire from absolute scratch. I earned every single dollar sitting in those accounts through my own blood, sweat, and brilliant strategy. Julian and his family had spent the entire evening treating me like a disposable maid, completely oblivious to the fact that they were living inside a fortress that I had built and paid for. They thought my money was their birthright simply because I carried Julian's last name. They truly believed that my silence at the dinner table was a sign of weakness, a pathetic acceptance of my lower rank in their delusional hierarchy. I closed the laptop with a sharp, satisfying snap. I was not a maid, and I was certainly not a charity case. I was the bank. I was the sole foundation, holding their entire opulent universe together. And as I walked away from the desk and slipped into the incredibly soft sheets of the penthouse bed, I smiled in the quiet darkness. In exactly 48 hours, the weekend would be over, the banks would open for business, and the devastating reality of my absence was going to hit them like a freight train. Monday morning arrived with the crisp efficiency I was known for. I left the Four Seasons penthouse early, dressed in a sharp charcoal blazer, and drove straight to the headquarters of Apex Logistics. Walking through the glass doors of my company always gave me a rush of adrenaline, but today, that feeling was magnified tenfold. The massive warehouse operations humming in the background, the phones ringing in the sales department, the respect from my employees as I walked past their desks, it was a stark reminder of who I actually was. I was not a maid. I was a self-made titan. I poured myself a cup of dark roast coffee, sat behind my expansive glass desk, and placed my phone right next to my keyboard. I had specifically configured the corporate banking application to send push notifications directly to my home screen for any declined transactions. All I had to do now was wait for the financial whiplash to strike. It did not take long. At exactly 1:15 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed against the glass. The screen illuminated with a bright red notification. It was a decline charge for $3,250 at an exclusive designer boutique in the Buckhead shopping district. I took a slow sip of my coffee and smiled. Brielle. I could picture the scene with absolute crystal clarity. Brielle had undoubtedly skipped her afternoon classes, opting instead to parade around the high-end stores with her equally spoiled sorority sisters. She loved playing the role of the wealthy heiress. She loved the feeling of walking into a luxury boutique, having the sales associates offer her sparkling water, and pointing at whatever expensive leather good caught her eye. Today, she was likely trying to buy a new handbag just to spite me, fully intending to charge it to the woman she had proudly humiliated less than 48 hours prior. She would have strutted up to the marble checkout counter, flanked by her friends acting completely indifferent to the astronomical price tag. The polished sales associate would have carefully boxed the handbag, wrapping it in tissue paper and tying it with a signature ribbon. Brielle would have casually pulled the heavy metal American Express card from her wallet and slid it across the counter. She would have been laughing with her friends, totally absorbed in her own manufactured reality. Then would come the agonizing pause. The sales associate would slide the card into the heavy brass terminal. The machine would process for a few seconds before beeping sharply. The screen would flash a red error message. The associate trained to handle these awkward moments with maximum discretion would likely try the chip a second time. Another beep, another decline. I knew exactly how Brielle would react. Her smug smile would instantly evaporate. The sales associate would lean forward and softly inform her that the card was not going through, asking if she had another method of payment. Brielle would instantly go on the defensive, her face flushing hot red. She would aggressively tell the cashier to try it again, insisting that there was plenty of money in the account and that the store's machine must be broken. She would frantically open her phone trying to access Apple Pay, only to find that the digital card had been suspended as well. Her sorority sisters, who normally looked at her with envy, would suddenly be staring at her with uncomfortable pity. The illusion of her endless wealth would crack right in front of them. Humiliated and furious, Brielle would be forced to tell the cashier to hold the bag, snatching her dead credit card off the counter and practically running out of the store. She would immediately try to call her father, demanding to know why her unlimited ATM machine had suddenly been shut off. But Julian was not going to be able to answer her call, because less than 45 minutes later, my phone vibrated a second time. A new notification popped up on my screen. This one was a declined charge for $890 at an incredibly exclusive reservations-only steakhouse in downtown Atlanta. Julian. Julian loved hosting flashy business lunches at this particular restaurant. It was a place where the waiters wore white coats, the lighting was dim, and the steaks were dry, aged to perfection. He was undoubtedly sitting in a plush leather booth, holding court with a group of his old fraternity brothers. He loved playing the role of the ultimate patriarch, the successful businessman who had the world on a string. He would have ordered the massive tomahawk ribeyes for the table, paired with expensive appetizers and a vintage bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon. He would have spent the entire 2-hour lunch boasting about his supposed corporate conquests. He would have likely brought up the incident at the Thanksgiving dinner, completely twisting the narrative to make himself look like the alpha male. He would have told his friends that I threw a minor emotional tantrum, that women are just overly sensitive sometimes, and that he had put his foot down to maintain order in his castle. His friends would have laughed, clinking their heavy crystal glasses together, completely buying into the lie that he was the undisputed king of his household. Then the waiter would arrive with the bill presented discreetly inside a sleek black leather folio. Julian, always eager to show off his financial dominance, would confidently reach into his tailored suit jacket. He would pull out the platinum corporate card, drop it onto the tray without even glancing at the total, and wave the waiter away with an arrogant flick of his wrist. The conversation at the table would continue flowing loud and boastful. But a few minutes later, the waiter would return. He would not have a pen and a receipt for Julian to sign. Instead, the waiter would lean down, shielding the folio from the rest of the table, and whisper quietly into Julian's ear. "Sir, I am so sorry, but this card has been declined." Julian's heart would drop directly into his stomach. The arrogant smile would freeze on his face. He would look up at the waiter, his mind racing to comprehend the impossible. He would quickly snatch the leather folio off the table, staring at the little slip of paper as if it were written in a foreign language. He would force a tight, artificial laugh, looking around at his fraternity brothers, who had suddenly stopped talking. "Must be a fraud alert," Julian would lie, his voice a pitch higher than normal. "You know how these banks are when you spend too much at once." He would reach into his wallet again, his hands slightly trembling, and pull out a different card. This one was tied to his personal business checking account, the account he swore funded his life. He would hand it to the waiter with a forced smile. But I knew the truth about that account. Without my monthly $12,000 wire transfer to prop it up, that account was entirely empty. 2 minutes later, the waiter would return again. The look of professional pity on the waiter's face would be absolutely devastating. "Declined again, sir." The heavy, suffocating silence that would fall over the leather booth was something I wish I could have witnessed in person. The men Julian had just spent 2 hours trying to impress would now be staring at him with a mixture of confusion and second-hand embarrassment. The grand illusion of his wealth was disintegrating in real time. Julian, sweating profusely inside his expensive suit, would be forced to look across the table and ask one of his fraternity brothers to cover the $800 tab. The absolute shame of that moment would burn his ego to the ground. I watched the screen of my phone light up with an incoming call from Julian. I did not answer it. I let it ring until it went straight to voicemail. Julian did not leave a message. Instead, I knew exactly what he was doing. He would have practically sprinted out of the steakhouse, leaving his confused friends behind. He would be pacing furiously back and forth on the busy downtown sidewalk, his face flushed hot with rage and humiliation. He would dial the premium customer service number on the back of the platinum card, fully preparing to unleash his anger on whatever bank employee answered the phone. Through my corporate banking portal, I could actually see the customer service inquiry log in real time. I knew exactly how that phone call was going to play out. Julian would bypass the automated menu, demanding to speak to a human representative immediately. When the representative answered, Julian would launch into a blistering tirade. He would demand to know why his card was being declined at a restaurant, threatening to pull all of his non-existent millions from their institution if the hold was not removed instantly. He would scream that he was a highly respected businessman and that they were embarrassing him in public. The representative, trained to remain completely detached and professional, would ask for his name and his social security number to verify his identity. Julian would bark the numbers into the phone, pacing faster, waiting for the apology he felt he was so deeply owed. Then the cold, hard reality of his actual position in life would be delivered through the earpiece. "Sir," the representative would say calmly, "I see the account here. However, I must inform you that you are not the primary account holder. You are listed only as an authorized user." Julian would stop dead in his tracks on the sidewalk. "I am the husband," he would yell back, panic finally beginning to bleed through his anger. "It is a joint account. Fix it." "I apologize for the inconvenience, sir," the representative would continue, completely unmoved by his demands. "But this is not a joint checking or credit account. This is a corporate financial account belonging entirely to Apex Logistics, LLC. The primary account owner has permanently revoked your authorized access and terminated your physical card. We cannot process any transactions, and we cannot reinstate your access without direct authorization from the Chief Executive Officer." The words would hit Julian like a physical blow to the chest. Apex Logistics LLC. He would realize in that exact moment that the financial umbilical cord had been violently severed. This was not a banking error. This was not a temporary fraud alert. And most terrifyingly of all this was not a simple emotional tantrum from a wife who was feeling underappreciated. This was a highly calculated surgical strike. Julian would end the call standing frozen on the sidewalk as pedestrians walked past him. He would look down at the heavy platinum card in his hand, realizing that it was now nothing more than a useless piece of plastic. He would think about the mortgage that was due in exactly 4 days. He would think about the lease on the Mercedes he had driven to the restaurant. He would think about Brielle's tuition, his club memberships, and the massive wall of debt he had secretly hidden behind my success. For 3 years, I had allowed him to play the king. I had allowed him to sit at the head of a table I bought eating food I paid for, while he and his family insulted my intelligence and demanded my submission. They had mistaken my quiet financial support for weakness. They had genuinely believed I was trapped by my desire to have a family, assuming I would endure any amount of disrespect just to keep the title of being his wife. I picked up my phone, dismissing the missed call notification, and went back to reviewing my quarterly shipping manifests. The weekend was over. The fake reality they had grown so comfortable living in had officially collapsed. And as I highlighted a profitable contract on my screen, I knew that the panic setting in across town was only the very beginning of their downfall. They wanted me to be the maid, so I simply stopped paying the bills. Let the traditional provider figure out how to keep his castle from crumbling. Exactly 2 hours after I watched the steakhouse charge bounce on my laptop screen, the polished brass telephone on my hotel suite desk began to ring. It was the front desk concierge. His voice was incredibly tight and professional, but I could hear the underlying tension. He informed me that a gentleman claiming to be my husband was currently pacing the main lobby, raising his voice at the security staff and demanding my room number. The concierge asked if I wanted them to quietly escort him off the premises. I closed my laptop and stood up, smoothing the front of my blazer. I told the concierge not to touch him. I wanted to handle this personally. I slipped on my heels, walked out of my penthouse, and took the glass elevator down to the main floor. The lobby of the Four Seasons was a masterpiece of modern luxury, filled with imported marble towering floral arrangements and wealthy guests sipping espresso in velvet armchairs. And standing right in the center of it all, looking completely unhinged, was Julian. His expensive tailored suit jacket was unbuttoned, his silk tie was violently loosened around his neck. He was sweating his face, a blotchy mix of red and gray, frantically tapping his foot against the polished floor. The confident, boastful patriarch, who had laughed at me over Thanksgiving dinner, was entirely gone. In his place was a terrified man, whose entire fake reality had just been ripped out from under him. He spotted me stepping out of the elevator and immediately charged across the lobby. He did not care that wealthy patrons and hotel staff were watching him. His ego was bleeding and he was desperate to stop the hemorrhage. "What the hell is wrong with you, Chloe?" Julian hissed, pointing a trembling finger at my face as he closed the distance between us. "Turn the cards back on right now. You had my card declined in front of my fraternity brothers. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? I had to beg Marcus to cover an $800 tab. What did you do to our joint accounts?" I stopped walking, planting my feet firmly on the marble floor. I did not lower my voice to protect his pride. I spoke clearly and calmly, allowing my voice to carry across the quiet lobby. "We do not have joint accounts, Julian," I stated, staring directly into his frantic eyes. "We have never had joint accounts." Julian blinked, his hand freezing midair. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, his voice cracking. "The platinum card, the checking account." I crossed my arms over my chest. I looked at this man, 40 years old and completely financially illiterate, and I finally dropped the heavy curtain I had been holding up for 3 years. The platinum card you have been swiping to buy custom suits and expensive steaks belongs to Apex Logistics LLC. I explained slowly, as if I were speaking to a slow child. You were an authorized user on my corporate account. The checking account you use to pay your golf club fees has been empty for 2 years. The only reason it ever had a positive balance was because I personally wired $12,500 into it on the 28th of every single month to cover the mortgage and your car lease. Julian physically recoiled, taking a stumbling step back. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. "You are lying," he whispered, looking around the lobby as if hoping someone would step in and tell him this was a prank. "My consulting business makes money. I am the head of our household. Your consulting business has not turned a single dime of profit since 2022, Julian." I countered, my voice echoing slightly off the marble columns. "You are not the head of the household. You are a dependent. You are a dependent who allowed his teenage daughter to pour sticky cider all over my silk dress while you laughed and called me a maid. Well, the maid just quit. I revoked your access to my company funds. I canceled the auto drafts for the estate, and I am not paying Brielle's college tuition." The blistering reality of my words hit him so hard his knees actually buckled slightly. The anger completely vanished from his eyes, instantly replaced by a deep, suffocating terror. He looked down at his expensive shoes, then back up at me. The arrogant king was suddenly a beggar. "Chloe, please," Julian begged, his voice dropping to a desperate, pathetic whisper. He reached out and tried to grab my hand, but I snatched it away before he could make contact. "Please, you cannot do this. The mortgage is due on the 1st. I do not have $12,000. The bank will foreclose on the house. My mother will find out. My friends will know. You have to come home. We can fix this. I will make Brielle apologize to you. I will do whatever you want. Please just turn the accounts back on." I looked at the sheer desperation dripping from his face. He was not apologizing because he loved me. He was not begging me to come home because he recognized my worth as a human being. He was begging me to come back because his financial life support had been unplugged, and he was terrified of looking broke in front of his mother and his friends. I pulled my shoulders back and looked at him with absolute freezing indifference. "You wanted to be the traditional black provider," Julian Weiss said, my voice dripping with finality. "You sat at my table eating the food I paid for, and let your mother lecture me on how I needed to be submissive to your incredible wealth and stature. You let Heather tell me my corporate job was making me too masculine. So go ahead, be the man you claim to be. Provide, pay your own bills." I turned my back on him without waiting for a response and walked straight toward the hotel concierge. I thanked the staff member for his time and stepped back into the glass elevator. As the doors slid shut, I watched Julian standing frozen in the middle of the luxurious lobby, completely shattered, staring blindly at the floor as his entire fake empire crumbled into dust around him. I spent the rest of the afternoon working peacefully from my suite, completely undisturbed. But I knew Julian's ego was a dangerous and predictable thing. He was entirely incapable of accountability. Rather than admit his profound failures, he would retreat into the comforting delusion his family provided. My confirmation came exactly at 7 o'clock that evening. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a lengthy text message from Heather. I opened it, already knowing the tone she would use. "Chloe," the message read, "Julian just came over to the house to speak with Dion and Mama Estelle. He told us everything about your little meltdown at the hotel today. We all agree that freezing his access to the accounts was incredibly petty and jealous. Julian told us you are just lashing out because you feel insecure about your role in the family. Do not worry about the house. Julian assured us he is easily handling the mortgage and all the family bills from his own business accounts moving forward. He does not need your money. We are just praying you find peace with your own bitterness." I read the message twice, a slow, deep laugh rumbling in my chest. He actually did it. He looked his mother and his brother dead in the face and lied to them. He was sitting on a mountain of debt, entirely cut off from his only source of income, with a $12,000 mortgage due in exactly 4 days, and he chose to double down on the illusion. He chose his ego over reality. I tossed the phone onto the bed and picked up my glass of wine. The audience was set. The players were blindly following their scripts. Julian was dead broke, but he had just promised his entire family that he was the financial savior. I did not need to lift another finger. I was just going to sit back in my penthouse and watch him dig his own grave in front of the entire world. The illusion Julian sold his family was the fuel, and Heather and Mama Estelle were more than happy to strike the match. By Tuesday morning, the public smear campaign was in full swing. I woke up in my penthouse, ordered a black coffee from room service, and opened my personal phone to find my notifications completely flooded. They had decided that since private intimidation had failed to bring the maid back to the kitchen, they were going to use public humiliation to force my compliance. Heather was the first to launch her digital artillery. I opened Facebook and saw that she had posted a lengthy, meticulously crafted status update. She had used a background of serene floating clouds to make her viciousness look like deep spiritual concern. The post read, "My heart is incredibly heavy today. Please join me in praying for the institution of marriage. We are living in a time where broken, emasculating women are actively trying to destroy the good men who provide for them. A man's home should be his sanctuary, not a war zone created by a wife who refuses to soften her heart. Praying for peace, submission, and traditional family values to prevail over bitter jealousy." She did not tag me directly, but she did not need to. She tagged Mama Estelle, Julian, and Dayon. Below the post, a massive echo chamber of agreement had already formed. Dozens of mutual acquaintances, country club wives, and distant relatives were leaving comments praising Julian's flawless character. They called him a pillar of the community. They told Heather how blessed her family was to have such strong men leading them. One comment from Heather's own sister even suggested that aggressive career women always end up alone because they simply do not know how to be nurtured. I scrolled through the comments, taking a slow sip of my coffee. The sheer hypocrisy of Heather championing traditional providers was almost poetic. She loved sitting on her high horse, completely unaware that her own husband Dion was currently being lied to by the very man they were all so fiercely protecting. She had no idea that Julian was slowly draining the money Dion had saved for his children just to keep up his country club appearances and pay off secret loans. But I was not going to correct her on Facebook. Social media arguments were for amateurs. I preferred to let my enemies speak their lies loudly, so that when the truth finally dropped, the silence would be deafening. While Heather was managing the digital front, Mama Estelle took her campaign directly to the pews. By noon, I started receiving text messages from women in Estelle's inner circle at the church. The first was from Sister Beatrice, a woman notorious for masking her insatiable thirst for gossip as religious counseling. "Chloe, sweetheart," the message from Beatrice read, "Estelle came to us in tears yesterday. We are holding a special prayer circle for your mental health. The devil is truly busy trying to convince you to steal Julian's hard-earned wealth. Please come back to the church so we can lay hands on you and cast out this spirit of rebellion. A good black man like Julian is rare. Do not let your pride ruin your blessings." I stared at the screen, analyzing the specific narrative Estelle had spun. She had not just told them we were having standard marital problems. She had weaponized the exact tropes designed to completely turn the community against me. She painted me as an unstable, greedy woman having a mental breakdown trying to ruthlessly drain the bank accounts of her highly successful husband. Estelle knew exactly how to play the victim by proxy. In her fabricated version of reality, Julian was the innocent, hardworking patriarch, and I was the ungrateful gold digger trying to ruin him out of sheer spite. This was their grand strategy. It was a classic textbook method of social bullying. They were trying to isolate me from my entire social circle. They wanted to make the external pressure so unbearable, the whispers so loud, and the judgment so heavy that I would eventually break under the weight of it all. They expected me to panic at the thought of losing my reputation. They expected me to feel so entirely ashamed of being labeled a bad wife that I would run back to the estate, apologize for my behavior, and quietly turn the corporate credit cards back on, just to make the rumors stop. It was actually a brilliant strategy for a weak woman. If I were truly financially dependent on Julian, or if my sense of self-worth was tied to the opinions of the women in Mama Estelle's prayer circle, I might have crumbled. I might have surrendered just to survive the social execution. But I was not a weak woman. I was the chief executive officer of a logistics empire that moved millions of dollars in freight every single week. I did not care about the opinions of people whose lives I could buy and sell before lunch. I did not need the church congregation to respect my marriage, because my marriage was a fraud that I had personally funded from day one. Instead of responding to Beatrice or defending myself in Heather's comment section, I simply took screenshots of every single message and post. I categorized them neatly in a secure digital folder on my phone. Every lie they told, every public declaration of Julian's immense wealth and my supposed instability was just more rope I was willingly handing them to hang themselves with. They wanted to make this a public spectacle. They wanted an audience. I was more than happy to give them exactly what they asked for. I spent the rest of the day finalizing shipping routes and securing a new vendor contract, completely unfazed by the continuous buzzing of my phone. But by Wednesday morning, I realized that ignoring them was only going to make them bolder. They were mistaking my strategic silence for cowardice. They thought I was hiding in my hotel room, too ashamed to show my face in the city after they had so thoroughly exposed me. I decided it was time to step out into the sunlight. It was time to remind them that I was not a woman who could be intimidated into submission by a few Facebook posts in a prayer circle. I needed a change of scenery from the penthouse, and I knew exactly where Mama Estelle and her church friends spent their Wednesday mornings after their weekly Bible study. They always went to an upscale artisanal coffee shop in the center of our neighborhood to drink expensive lattes and trade the week's gossip. I closed my laptop, walked into the massive marble bathroom of my suite, and began getting ready. I chose a tailored ivory white designer suit that screamed power and completely untouched wealth. I slipped on my diamond earrings, applied a bold red lip, and grabbed my crocodile Birkin bag. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I did not look like a broken, unstable woman having a mental breakdown. I looked like the absolute boss that I was. As I rode the elevator down to the lobby and handed the valet my ticket, my phone buzzed with one final message from Julian. It was short and dripping with fake authority. "The entire community knows what you are doing, Chloe. Stop embarrassing yourself and come home before my mother cuts you off completely." I smiled, tossing the phone into the passenger seat of my car. Julian was still clinging desperately to the delusion that his mother held any real power over me. He genuinely thought that turning the church against me was his ultimate winning move. He was about to learn a very hard lesson about what happens when you try to publicly shame the woman who secretly holds the deed to your entire life. I pulled out of the hotel driveway and headed straight toward the coffee shop. The smear campaign was about to hit a brick wall. The drive to the coffee shop in our upscale neighborhood took less than 15 minutes. The morning sun reflected brightly off the hood of my custom Range Rover as I pulled into a parking spot right in front of the large glass windows. I turned off the engine, took a deep breath, and grabbed my crocodile Birkin bag. I knew exactly what I was walking into. This coffee shop, with its exposed brick walls, hanging plants, and overpriced organic pastries, was the unofficial headquarters for the neighborhood gossip mill. Every Wednesday morning, right after their midweek Bible study, Mama Estelle and her inner circle of church friends occupied the large oak table in the center of the room. They treated the cafe like their own personal courtroom, passing judgment on everyone in the community over oat milk lattes. I pushed the heavy glass door open. The warm scent of roasted espresso and cinnamon washed over me. The shop was packed with the morning rush of young professionals and wealthy housewives. I walked straight past the seating area and joined the back of the line near the pastry display. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my designer white suit commanding immediate attention. It did not take long for the whispers to start. I felt the heavy weight of multiple stares burning into my back. I casually turned my head and looked toward the center of the room. There they were. Mama Estelle was sitting at the head of the large oak table flanked by Sister Beatrice and three other women from the church auxiliary board. Estelle was wearing a sharply pressed navy blue dress, a large pearl necklace resting on her chest. The moment we made eye contact, her eyes widened in genuine surprise. She clearly had not expected me to show my face in public after the vicious digital campaign she and Heather had launched. But surprise quickly shifted into aggressive indignation. Estelle saw an audience. The cafe was full of people we both knew. She saw this as the perfect opportunity to publicly humiliate me and solidify her false narrative. Estelle slammed her ceramic coffee mug down onto the table. She stood up, smoothing the front of her dress, and marched purposefully across the wooden floor toward the line where I was standing. Sister Beatrice and the other women eagerly followed right behind her, like a pack of loyal soldiers ready for battle. The ambient chatter in the coffee shop began to instantly die down as people sensed the incoming confrontation. "Well, look who finally decided to crawl out of hiding," Estelle announced. Her voice was incredibly loud, designed specifically to carry to every single corner of the quiet cafe. The barista standing behind the espresso machine actually stopped steaming milk to watch. I turned fully around to face her, my expression completely blank. "Good morning, Estelle," I said softly, my calm tone sharply contrasting with her aggressive volume. "Do not you dare good morning me," Estelle snapped, taking another step forward until she was only a few feet away. "You have some absolute nerve walking into this neighborhood showing your face after what you have done to my son. You are a disgrace to the institution of marriage, Chloe. You are parading around the city throwing a ridiculous temper tantrum while a good black man sits at home trying to keep his family from falling apart." Sister Beatrice nodded enthusiastically, crossing her arms over her chest. "We have been praying for your deeply troubled mind, Chloe." Beatrice chimed in, projecting her voice for the crowd. "It is not too late to repent for your greed. The devil is using your ambition to blind you." I looked at the women standing in front of me. They were so incredibly confident in their delusion. They thought their public shaming would make me shrink, lower my head, and run out the door in tears. They had spent their entire lives operating in a culture where protecting the image of a man was more important than protecting the reality of a woman. Estelle took a deep breath, preparing to deliver her final crushing blow. "You are actively trying to destroy Julian out of pure spite," she declared, pointing an accusatory finger at my chest. "He is a provider. He works day and night to build wealth for you, and the second he asks for a little respect in his own beautiful home, you try to steal his money and freeze his bank accounts. You are an unstable, bitter woman who does not know how to appreciate a successful man." The entire coffee shop was dead silent. Every single patron was staring at us, waiting to see how the disgraced wife would handle the public execution. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or lose my temper. I looked directly into Estelle's eyes, tilted my head slightly, and let out a soft, amused laugh. "A successful man?" I repeated, my voice crisp and clear in the quiet room. "A good black provider. Is that what we are calling him today, Estelle?" Estelle frowned, her pointing finger dropping slightly as she sensed the sudden shift in my energy. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. I took a single step forward, invading her personal space, forcing her to look up at me in my heels. "Let us talk about this incredible wealth you claim I am trying to steal," I said, allowing my voice to project effortlessly across the cafe. "Do you mean the wealth from his elite consulting firm? Because according to the forensic accounting file sitting on my desk, that firm has not turned a single dime of profit since 2022. Estelle blinked rapidly, the color starting to drain from her face. "That is a lie," she stammered, her loud confidence beginning to fracture. "Julian is incredibly successful." "Julian is bankrupt," I stated firmly, dropping the first heavy stone of truth. "And he would have been formally indicted by the IRS 2 years ago if I had not quietly written a personal check for $85,000 to bail his failing business out of federal tax debt. I saved him from federal prison, Estelle. I am the only reason he is not sitting in a cell right now." Sister Beatrice gasped loudly, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. The other churchwomen exchanged horrified, confused glances. The narrative they had been fed was actively crumbling right in front of their eyes. But I was not finished. I turned my attention briefly to Beatrice. You women talk about his beautiful home and his luxury cars. Do you want to know why Julian's credit card was humiliatingly declined at the downtown steakhouse yesterday in front of his entire fraternity? It is because he does not have a credit card. He has been swiping my corporate company card for 2 years to buy you all those expensive gifts you love to brag about on Facebook. Estelle took a stumbling step backward, physically recoiling, as if I had struck her. Stop it, she whispered, looking frantically around the cafe, at the wide-eyed patrons listening to every word. You are making this up. You are lying to embarrass him. I reached into my Birkin bag and seamlessly pulled out a folded piece of heavy stock paper. I had printed the vehicle registration for the Mercedes-Benz sitting in Julian's driveway before I left the hotel. I opened the paper and held it up right in front of Estelle's face. Read the name on the vehicle registration. Estelle, I commanded, my voice turning to absolute ice. Read the name of the legal owner of the luxury car your son drives to church every Sunday to show off to these exact women. Estelle stared blindly at the paper. She did not read it out loud, but Sister Beatrice leaned over, squinting at the bold black ink. It says Apex Logistics, LLC. Beatrice read slowly, her voice trembling with shock. It says Chloe. That is right, Beatrice, I said, folding the paper and sliding it back into my bag. Everything he has belongs entirely to me. I pay the $12,000 mortgage on that estate. I pay for the country club memberships he uses to look important. I even pay the internet bill you used to post those ridiculous lies about me on the internet this morning. So do not you ever stand in a public place and accuse me of stealing wealth from a man who has been secretly living on my corporate allowance for 3 years. Estelle was shaking. Her navy blue dress suddenly looked too big for her. The proud, arrogant matriarch who had marched up to me just 2 minutes prior was entirely gone. She looked at her church friends, desperately searching their faces for support. But they were all stepping slowly away from her. They were horrified. They realized they had been weaponized to defend a massive, pathetic lie. Julian told us he was handling all the family bills, one of the auxiliary women whispered, looking at Estelle with deep judgment. He said he did not need your money. Julian is a coward who would rather lie to his own mother than admit he is broke, I replied, keeping my eyes locked on Estelle. And you, Estelle, are a fool for blindly believing a man who allowed his teenage daughter to disrespect his wife. You thought you could bully me into coming back to the kitchen to play the maid. But the truth is, I am the bank. And the bank is permanently closed. The silence in the coffee shop was absolute. The barista had completely stopped moving. A few patrons were actually holding their phones up, secretly recording the devastating exchange. Estelle could not handle the crushing weight of the public humiliation. Her entire social standing, built entirely on the fabricated success of her golden son, had just been publicly decimated in front of the very women she wanted to impress. Her lower lip trembled. She did not say a single word in defense of her son. She simply turned around, grabbed her expensive handbag off the oak table, and practically ran toward the exit of the cafe. She pushed the glass door open so hard it slammed against the brick wall, fleeing the shop in deep, agonizing embarrassment. Sister Beatrice and the remaining women stood frozen in the middle of the floor, completely unsure of what to do. I looked at Beatrice and offered a very small, perfectly polite smile. Have a wonderful Bible study, ladies, I said smoothly. I highly suggest you focus your next prayer circle on the sin of bearing false witness. I turned my back on them and walked to the front counter. The young barista, staring at me with a mixture of pure awe and slight terror, quickly punched my order into the register. I paid for my iced black coffee, dropped a generous tip into the glass jar, and waited patiently at the end of the bar. When my name was called, I took my cup, walked gracefully past the silent churchwomen, and exited the cafe into the bright morning sunlight. The smear campaign was officially dead. I had taken their greatest weapon, public perception, and turned it entirely against them. As I climbed back into the leather driver's seat of my Range Rover and started the engine, my phone buzzed with an email notification from my corporate attorney. Julian had just taken the bait. The game was about to escalate from a local family dispute into a federal felony, and I was entirely ready to watch him fall. The glass-walled conference room at Apex Logistics headquarters is my absolute sanctuary. It sits suspended on the second floor, looking directly out over the massive humming warehouse operations below. From my seat at the head of the long marble table, I can watch dozens of forklifts moving pallets, truck drivers signing manifests, and my dispatchers coordinating millions of dollars in freight. This building is the physical manifestation of my blood, sweat, and intellect. It is an environment completely devoid of fake prestige or fragile egos. Here, the only thing that matters is results. It was Thursday afternoon, exactly 24 hours after I left Mama Estelle trembling in the neighborhood coffee shop. I was reviewing a lucrative new shipping contract with my operations manager when the heavy glass doors of the lobby swung open downstairs. Even through the soundproof glass of my boardroom, I could see the sudden commotion on the main floor. My receptionist, a stern woman who had been with me since the beginning, had actually stood up from her desk and was physically trying to block 3 people from walking past the security turnstiles. I did not need to guess who it was. I watched Julian, Dion, and Heather shove their way past the receptionist, completely ignoring her demands that they sign in. They marched aggressively across the operations floor, drawing the confused stares of my warehouse staff. Julian was leading the charge, his face flushed a dark, angry red. Dion followed closely behind him, his jaw set in a hard line of misguided fraternal loyalty. Heather walked right beside them, clutching her designer handbag like a shield, her chin tilted up in that familiar posture of unearned superiority. I signaled for my operations manager to step out. I closed the file folder on the table, leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, and waited. The door to my conference room burst open so violently, the glass actually vibrated in its metal frame. Julian stormed into the room, bringing the chaotic energy of a desperate man completely out of his depth. Dion and Heather stepped in right behind him, closing the door and effectively cornering me in my own corporate space. "How dare you!" Julian bellowed, his voice echoing loudly in the enclosed room. He marched up to the marble table and slammed both of his hands down flat against the surface, leaning over to get as close to my face as the table would allow. "How dare you speak to my mother that way in public? You humiliated her in front of her entire church group. You stood there and lied to her friends." I looked down at his shaking hands, then slowly raised my eyes to meet his frantic gaze. I did not flinch. I did not lean back. "I did not lie to your mother, Julian," I replied, my voice perfectly level. "I simply corrected the ridiculous narrative you gave her. If the truth is humiliating, that is a reflection of your life choices, not my behavior." Dion stepped forward, his massive frame attempting to add physical intimidation to the ambush. "You are completely out of line," Chloe, Dion growled, pointing a thick finger at me. "You do not disrespect family like that. Mama Estelle has been crying for 2 days because of your temper tantrum. Julian works hard for this family, and you are trying to destroy his reputation just because you are mad about some spilled cider at Thanksgiving. Turn his bank accounts back on right now and transfer the money for the house. You are acting like a bitter child." I looked at Dion. Of the 3 people standing in this room, Dion was the only one I actually felt a tiny fraction of pity for. He was a hard-working, honest man who loved his brother blindly. He had no idea that the man he was so fiercely defending was a complete financial parasite. Dion genuinely believed Julian was a highly successful consultant experiencing a temporary cash flow issue because his vindictive wife froze their joint accounts. Before I could address Dion, Heather decided it was her turn to take control of the room. She stepped around her husband, placing a hand on her hip. She looked around my pristine conference room, glancing at the busy warehouse floor below, before fixing her pale eyes on me with a look of utter condescension. "Let us drop the emotional theatrics," Chloe Heather said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness and a sharp, calculating edge. "We are not here to argue with you, we are here to give you an ultimatum. You are going to log into your computer right now and wire the $12,500 for the mortgage directly into Julian's account. If you do not, you are going to face severe legal consequences." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely amused by her audacity. "Legal consequences," I repeated slowly. "Please, Heather, enlighten me." Heather smiled clearly, thinking she had just backed me into a corner. She loved using her privilege to intimidate people, and she firmly believed she understood the law better than the black woman sitting in front of her. "Julian has already spoken to a very aggressive divorce attorney this morning." Heather lied smoothly, taking another step toward the table. "You see, Chloe, the courts do not look kindly on financial abuse. You are the primary breadwinner of this marriage. You cannot just unilaterally cut off your spouse from marital assets and leave him with nothing. It is illegal. If you do not pay that mortgage today, Julian is going to file for divorce, and we are going to help him sue you for spousal support alimony and half the value of this entire logistics company." Julian straightened his posture, puffing his chest out. "That is right," he added, trying to sound authoritative, but failing to mask the desperate tremor in his voice. "You think you hold all the cards because your name is on the business. But I am your husband. Half of everything you have built belongs to me. You are going to pay the mortgage, you are going to pay the lease on my car, and you are going to apologize to my mother. If you do not, I will drag you through court and take half your empire." I sat in absolute silence for a long moment, simply staring at the three of them. The sheer, breathtaking magnitude of their delusion was almost beautiful. They had actually marched into my fortress, into a building I bought with money I earned, to threaten me with a fake lawyer. Heather was standing in my glass boardroom, trying to weaponize the legal system to force me to continue funding her brother-in-law's fake reality. I looked at Julian. He was sweating. He did not want half my company. He did not want to go through a lengthy, invasive divorce trial. A divorce trial would require full financial discovery. It would require him to submit his tax returns and his business ledgers to a judge, which would instantly expose the fact that he was completely bankrupt and heavily in debt. He was bluffing. He was backed into a corner, terrified of losing the estate on the first of the month, and he was using Heather's arrogant confidence as a shield. I let out a soft, genuine laugh. The sound completely threw them off guard. Heather's smug smile faltered and Dion frowned in confusion. "You think this is funny?" Dion demanded, stepping closer to the table. "You think Julian is bluffing about taking half your money?" I stopped laughing and leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cool marble. I looked directly at Heather. "Your understanding of corporate law is as fake as your concern for my marriage." "Heather," I stated coldly. Apex Logistics, LLC, was incorporated and fully functional 3 years before I ever met Julian. My corporate attorneys structured my assets in an irrevocable trust long before I signed a marriage license. Julian is not entitled to a single truck, a single warehouse, or a single dime of this company. He signed a prenuptial agreement on the advice of my legal team that completely waives his right to spousal support. Julian's face went completely gray. He had obviously forgotten about the thick stack of legal documents my lawyers had placed in front of him before the wedding, or perhaps he had been too arrogant to actually read them. As for financial abuse, I continued, my voice growing sharper. Turning the corporate credit cards off does not qualify as abuse when the cards belong to a business entity and not a joint checking account. Julian is not a victim, he is a freeloader. And I am not transferring $12,000 to save a house that you cannot afford. Heather crossed her arms, her face flushing with anger. "You are an incredibly selfish woman, Chloe," she spat, dropping the legal facade and reverting to pure venom. "Julian is your family. When you marry someone, you take on their burdens. You help them. You do not abandon them when they have a slow month at work just to prove a point. You are trying to ruin him." A slow month at work, I repeated, looking past Heather to focus entirely on Dion. I watched the honest confusion in Dion's eyes. He truly believed his brother was just hitting a minor rough patch. I realized in that exact moment that Julian's lies ran much deeper than just pretending to be wealthy. He had deceived his own brother in ways that were completely unforgivable. I slowly stood up from my chair. I walked over to the large, secure filing cabinet sitting in the corner of my conference room. I unlocked the heavy metal drawer, the loud click echoing in the tense silence of the room. I reached inside and pulled out a thick manila file folder labeled Forensic Audit. I walked back to the head of the marble table and placed the heavy folder down with a solid thud. "You keep talking about Julian's successful business, Dion," I said softly, keeping my eyes locked on his. "You keep telling me that I need to be a supportive wife and help him through a temporary cash flow issue. You drove all the way to my office today to defend his honor and demand that I pay his bills." I placed my hand flat on top of the manila folder. Julian closed his eyes, a look of profound, sickening dread washing over his face. He knew exactly what was inside that folder. He had seen the digital version of it on my laptop at the hotel. He knew that the ultimate checkmate was about to be played, and he was completely powerless to stop it. "You think I cut him off because of a spilled drink at Thanksgiving?" I continued, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "I cut him off because I finally hired an independent forensic accountant to look into where exactly my money was going. I wanted to know how a man who received a $12,000 allowance every single month could possibly be $50,000 in debt to private lenders." Dion's thick brow furrowed deeply. "Private lenders?" Dion echoed, looking quickly over at his brother. "Julian, what is she talking about?" Julian did not answer. He was staring at the floor, his chest heaving as he struggled to breathe. Heather looked back and forth between the two men, sensing the massive shift in the room's energy. Her arrogant confidence was entirely gone, replaced by a sudden creeping anxiety. I flipped the manila folder open. The top page was a detailed spreadsheet highlighting multiple unauthorized wire transfers and hidden bank accounts that Julian had desperately tried to conceal. The financial reality of the man they worshipped was sitting right there in black and white ink, ready to completely obliterate their family from the inside out. I looked at Dayon, bracing myself to deliver the blow that would shatter his world forever. I did not just want them to read a few printed pages inside a folder. I wanted the truth to be magnified so large and bright that neither of them could ever look away from it or deny its existence again. I picked up the small silver remote resting on the center of the marble table and pressed a single button. The heavy mechanical blinds on the glass walls automatically lowered, sealing us off from the warehouse floor below. The large projector screen descended from the ceiling with a quiet hum. I opened my laptop, typed in my secure administrative password, and mirrored my screen directly to the projector overhead. The conference room was instantly bathed in the harsh, glaring blue light of the financial spreadsheet. It was a massive document, intricately color-coded and brutally honest. I grabbed a laser pointer from my pen cup and stood up, walking to the front of the room like an executive about to deliver a hostile takeover presentation. Dayon stepped closer to the screen, his eyes squinting as he scanned the rows of numbers. He was a smart, hard-working man, but he was looking at the ledger of a complete ghost. I pressed the button on the pointer and circled the top column with a bright green dot. "This is Julian's elite consulting firm," I said clearly, moving the green laser along the total revenue line for the year 2023. The number on the screen was a bold, undeniable 0. "And here's the year 2024, I continued, sliding the laser down to the next row. "Another 0. Your brother has not signed a single client, generated a single invoice, or earned a single dollar of legitimate income in 24 consecutive months. He has been sitting in a leased office space pretending to work while playing online poker and scrolling through sports scores." Heather scoffed loudly, her voice shaking with a desperate mixture of denial and rising panic. "That is absolutely impossible," she stammered, pointing a manicured finger at Julian, who was now frozen near the door. He just bought you a stunning diamond bracelet for your anniversary. He took us all out on a chartered yacht for his birthday last summer. He always picks up the tab at the country club. Where did that money come from if he is not making any? I moved the laser down to a different tab labeled Corporate Liabilities. The anniversary bracelet was charged to my company credit card, I explained, looking directly at Heather's pale face. The chartered yacht was paid for using a high-interest payday loan he secured through a shadow lender on the internet. He has been taking out private loans at 30% interest just to maintain the illusion that he is wealthier than you and Dion. He has literally been funding his massive ego with toxic debt. Dion was staring at the screen, his breathing becoming heavy and ragged. He turned slowly to look at Julian. Julian was backed against the heavy oak door, looking exactly like a trapped animal. The arrogant posture he had walked in with was completely gone. He looked small, pathetic, and terrified. "You lied to us," Dion whispered, his voice thick with profound betrayal. "You sat at my dinner table every Sunday drinking my beer and gave me condescending investment advice while you were secretly borrowing money from loan sharks. You let Mama Estelle praise you as the golden child while you were drowning." "That is not even the worst part, Dion," I said softly. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the projector fan above our heads. I clicked a button on my laptop and opened the final tab of the forensic audit. It was labeled External Family Accounts. I knew exactly how much Dion loved his two young children. I knew that he worked 50 grueling hours a week at a regional management job, saving every single spare dollar he could scrape together to ensure his kids would graduate college without the crushing burden of student loans. Years ago, Dion had trusted his supposedly wealthy, financially savvy older brother to manage a high-yield college investment fund for his children. He thought Julian was securing their future. "Look closely at the screen, Dion," I commanded, my voice dropping to a low, serious register. Dion looked up. The green laser was resting on a long series of withdrawal dates from the children's college fund. The spreadsheet detailed every single transaction over the last 2 years. $40,000, I stated, the words dropping like heavy anvils onto the polished marble table. Over the course of the last 18 months, Julian systematically drained exactly $40,000 from your children's college savings. He forged your digital signature to bypass the secondary authorization on the investment account. Heather gasped a sharp, ugly sound that ripped through her throat. She stumbled backward, her designer heels catching on the carpet, until she bumped into the conference room chairs. "No," Dion muttered, shaking his head rapidly as he stepped right up to the projector screen. He reached his large hand out, touching the negative balance displayed in red ink. "No, that money was locked in a trust. It was for their university tuition. Julian promised me he was putting it in a secure index fund." I pointed the laser at the corresponding expense column. "He withdrew $3,000 last May to pay for his exclusive golf trip to Pebble Beach," I read aloud, ruthlessly detailing the theft. "He withdrew another $5,000 in October to cover the past due lease on his Mercedes-Benz so the bank would not repossess it from his driveway. He stole from his own nieces and nephews so he could keep driving a luxury car to church and showing off to your mother." The silence that followed was the most dangerous kind of quiet. It was the absolute vacuum of air right before a massive bomb detonates. Dion simply stared at the negative balance on the screen. He blinked once, twice. He looked at the dates of the withdrawals, realizing that while he had been working overtime shifts to provide for his family, his brother had been living a life of supreme luxury, funded entirely by stolen money. Julian finally found his voice. "Dion, please," Julian pleaded, holding both of his hands up defensively in front of his chest. His voice was a high-pitched, pathetic whine. "I was going to put every single penny back. I swear to you. I just needed a temporary bridge loan to cover my lifestyle until my next big consulting contract came through. I hit a rough patch. You know how the economy is right now. I was going to replace the funds with interest before the kids ever even graduated high school. You stole from my children, Dion roared. It was not a question. It was a primal, devastating scream of pure agony. Dion did not hesitate. He did not ask another question or wait for another pathetic excuse. The massive man lunged across the conference room with terrifying speed. He grabbed his older brother by the collar of his expensive tailored suit and slammed him violently backward against the thick glass wall of the boardroom. The physical impact was so incredibly loud it echoed over the mechanical sounds of the warehouse outside, causing several of my employees down below to stop working and look up at the second-floor window. Julian gasped for air, his hands scrambling uselessly against Dion's thick forearms. Dion lifted him slightly off his feet, pinning him against the glass. "You piece of garbage!" Dion screamed, spit flying from his lips. "I trusted you. I defended you to my wife. I came down here today to fight your battles for you because I thought you were a good man. You stole my kid's future to pay for a golf trip. I am going to kill you!" Heather screamed. The sheer piercing sound of her panic filled the enclosed room. She dropped her designer handbag onto the floor, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. All of her smugness, all of her passive-aggressive superiority, and all of her arrogant confidence evaporated in a single millisecond. Her face was completely devoid of color, matching the white silk blouse she wore. The brutal reality of her situation had finally crystallized in her mind. Her family was not just socially embarrassed by my actions at the coffee shop. They were entirely financially ruined. The $40,000 they had relied on for their children's future was gone, squandered on expensive steaks and luxury car leases by a man they had worshipped as a god. Dion pulled his fist back fully, intending to shatter Julian's jaw right there in my corporate office. I did not flinch, but I was not going to allow a violent brawl to disrupt my place of business. I calmly reached under the lip of my heavy desk and pressed the silent security alarm. Within 5 seconds, the heavy wooden doors of the conference room swung open. 3 of my largest, fully uniformed security guards rushed into the room. "Separate them," I ordered coldly, pointing at the 2 brothers. The guards instantly moved in, grabbing Dion by the shoulders and pulling him forcefully away from Julian. Dion struggled against them for a moment, his chest heaving, his eyes completely wild with grief and rage. Julian slid down the glass wall, coughing heavily and adjusting his ruined silk tie, his face pale and terrified. "Let me go!" Dion shouted at the guards, though he stopped fighting their grip. He pointed a shaking finger at Julian. "You are dead to me. Do you hear me? You are absolutely dead to me. Do not you ever call my phone again. Do not you ever come near my house or my kids again." Heather was sobbing uncontrollably now. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a horrific realization. She had marched into my office, threatening to sue me for spousal support, entirely unaware that her own brother-in-law was the actual criminal in the room. She had no leverage, she had no money. She had nothing but the crushing weight of Julian's deception. I picked up the remote and raised the mechanical blinds, letting the natural light back into the room. I turned the projector off. The show was over. "Escort them out of my building," I instructed the head of security, my voice completely steady. "Do not let them stop at the reception desk. Walk them completely off the premises. If Julian ever sets foot on Apex Logistics property again, call the police and press charges for criminal trespassing." Dion did not need to be dragged out. He shrugged off the guard's hands, gave his brother one final look of absolute disgust, and stormed out of the conference room. Heather scrambled to pick up her purse from the floor and ran out right behind him, crying hysterically as she realized she now had to go home and explain to her children that their college fund was gone. Julian was the last to leave. The 2 remaining security guards grabbed him tightly by the arms. He did not fight them. He looked entirely broken. He turned his head slowly and looked back at me standing behind my marble desk. He opened his mouth to say something, perhaps to offer one final desperate apology or to beg for a bailout. But he saw the absolute zero in my eyes. He saw a woman who had finally dropped the dead weight she had been carrying for 3 years. He closed his mouth, lowered his head in utter defeat, and let the guards drag him out of my fortress. I watched the heavy glass doors of the lobby swing shut behind Julian, permanently sealing him out of the empire I had built. I walked back to my desk, sat down in my leather chair, and took a deep cleansing breath. The toxicity that had infected my life for 3 years had just been surgically removed. I spent the rest of the afternoon finalizing shipping logistics and signing new vendor contracts, feeling lighter and sharper than I had in months. By the time Friday evening rolled around, I was back in my penthouse suite at the Four Seasons, pouring myself a glass of expensive Pinot Noir and enjoying the sweeping sunset views of the Atlanta skyline. The brass telephone on the desk rang, interrupting the quiet jazz music I had playing in the background. It was the front desk concierge. His tone was perfectly polite, but I could hear the underlying strain of someone dealing with a very difficult situation. Ms. Chloe. I apologize for the interruption, the concierge said smoothly. But there is a young woman in the main lobby claiming to be your stepdaughter. She is currently yelling at our valet staff because her credit card was declined for the parking fee, and she is demanding a key to your suite. Shall I have hotel security escort her off the premises? I took a slow sip of my wine, a small smile touching my lips. Brielle. I knew it was only a matter of time before the financial drought forced her to seek out the well she had so carelessly poisoned. Do not call security, I told the concierge. Send her up to the penthouse. I will handle this personally. A few minutes later, a loud, aggressive knock echoed from the heavy wooden door of my suite. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Brielle stood in the hallway, looking like a complete disaster. The perfectly polished, designer-clad princess who had sneered at me across the Thanksgiving table was entirely gone. Her expensive blonde highlights were frizzy and unkempt. She was wearing a wrinkled designer tracksuit that I had purchased for her last Christmas, and she was dragging a heavy Louis Vuitton duffel bag across the carpet. She did not wait for an invitation. Brielle pushed right past me, dragging her bag into the center of my pristine living room. She dropped the heavy luggage onto the hardwood floor with a loud thud and immediately began pacing the room, completely ignoring the breathtaking view and the luxurious surroundings. This hotel is absolutely ridiculous, Brielle huffed, throwing her hands up in the air. The valet refused to park my car without a card on file. I had to leave it in the loading zone. And why are you even staying here, Chloe? Do you have any idea what kind of chaotic nightmare is going on at the house right now? I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against the marble kitchen island. I did not offer her a glass of water. I did not ask her to sit down. I simply crossed my arms over my chest and watched her unravel. Enlighten me, Brielle, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Dad is completely losing his mind, she complained, her voice rising in pitch as she threw herself onto the plush velvet sofa. He has been pacing the living room for 2 solid days. He is screaming on the phone with his accountants, and he actually yelled at me this morning. Me. He never yells at me. And the internet is off. I woke up this morning, and the Wi-Fi was completely disconnected. I could not even submit my midterm paper for my sociology class, let alone check my social media accounts. Dad told me the router was just broken, but I called the cable company myself, and the representative told me the account was suspended for non-payment. It is like living in the absolute Stone Age. I swirled the dark red wine in my glass, watching the sheer entitlement radiate from her every pore. She had not come here to apologize for humiliating me. She had not come to see if I was okay after walking out on my marriage. She had come here because her comfortable internet-connected life had been disrupted, and she expected the maid to fix it. But that is not even the worst part, Brielle continued, her eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and deep humiliation. She sat forward, gripping the edge of the sofa cushions. Do you have any idea how embarrassed I was today? I was sitting in the student union with my sorority sisters. We were planning our spring break trip to Cabo San Lucas. I had my laptop open in front of everyone, and I got an email marked urgent from the university bursar. They copied my academic advisor and the dean of students. Brielle paused, her face flushing a deep, blotchy red. My tuition check bounced, Chloe. $28,000 returned for insufficient funds. The financial aid office actually called me down to the administration building and told me if the balance is not paid in full by Monday morning, I am going to be administratively withdrawn from all of my classes. My sisters saw the email. They saw the giant red insufficient funds stamp on the screen before I could close the window. Do you know how embarrassing that is? Everyone in my chapter thinks I am broke. My reputation on campus is completely ruined. She stared at me, her chest heaving, fully expecting me to gasp in horror and immediately reach for my checkbook to save her social life. When I did not react, her anger flared back up. You need to fix this right now, Brielle demanded, pointing a manicured finger at me. Dad told us exactly what is going on. He said you are just throwing a massive temper tantrum because you are jealous of his relationship with his family. He said you froze the joint accounts just to be petty and prove a point. Well, playtime is over, Chloe. You proved your point. Now I need you to log into your banking portal and wire the money to the school immediately. And you need to call the cable company and turn the internet back on at the estate. I cannot live like this. I actually had to set my wine glass down on the marble counter because I was laughing so hard I thought I might drop it. The absolute, unadulterated audacity of this 19-year-old girl was staggering. She was standing inside a luxury penthouse paid for by my company, demanding that I fund her extravagant lifestyle, just days after she intentionally poured a sticky drink all over me and told me to fetch a towel. Let me make sure I understand this perfectly, I said, the laughter fading from my voice as I walked around the island to stand directly in front of her. 4 days ago, you intentionally dumped a full glass of freezing cider all over my custom silk dress. You sat at my dining table, looked me dead in the eyes, and called me a maid in front of your entire family. You did not apologize. You smirked, and your father laughed with you. And now you have the absolute nerve to march into my hotel suite, complain about your Wi-Fi being shut off, and demand that I pay your $28,000 tuition bill. Brielle rolled her eyes, throwing her head back against the sofa cushions. She was completely missing the severity of the situation. Oh my God, Chloe, are you really still mad about that little accident? It was a joke. You are always so uptight and serious about everything. You are my stepmother. It is literally your job to take care of me and support this family. You are supposed to be the adult here. Stop being so vindictive and just do your job so I can go back to my normal life. My job? I repeated the word, tasting bitter and metallic on my tongue. Let us talk about my job, Brielle. I leaned down slightly, invading her personal space, forcing her to look me directly in the eyes. My job is running a multi-million-dollar corporate logistics firm. My job is securing international freight contracts and managing hundreds of employees. My job is the only reason you have that Louis Vuitton bag you just carelessly dropped on my floor. My job is the reason you drive a Mercedes you did not pay for to go to a private university you cannot afford while wearing designer clothes you did not earn. Brielle blinked, her arrogant expression faltering slightly as the sheer force of my words hit her. You think your father is acting crazy because I am throwing a tantrum? I continued ruthlessly. Your father is acting crazy because he is completely bankrupt. He has been broke for years, Brielle. He does not have a single dime to his name. The massive estate you are living in, the gourmet food you eat, the high-speed internet you use to post your little videos, it was all paid for entirely by me. Your father is a fraud who literally stole $40,000 from your Uncle Dion just to keep up appearances at the country club, and the moment I turned off the financial tap, his entire fake kingdom collapsed. You are lying, Brielle shouted, jumping up from the sofa. Her face turned a deep shade of crimson as she tried to defend the illusion she had worshipped her entire life. My dad is a highly successful consultant. He told me you were just trying to financially abuse him to gain control of the house. He said he has plenty of money. If your dad is so highly successful, then why did your tuition check bounce? I asked simply. my voice dropping to a whisper that echoed in the quiet room. If he has all this money, why is his credit card declining at restaurants? Why is he screaming at accountants and letting the cable company shut off his utilities? Call him right now, Brielle. Pull your phone out and put him on speakerphone. Ask your highly successful father to wire you the $28,000 from his own business account. Let us see what he says. Brielle froze. Her hand hovered over the pocket of her tracksuit, but she did not pull her smartphone out. Deep down, past the thick layers of entitlement and the decades of delusion her father had fed her, she knew I was telling the absolute truth. She had seen the raw panic in Julian's eyes over the last 2 days. She had seen him frantically shuffling papers and ignoring calls from collection agencies. She knew the money was gone. The reality of her situation finally broke through her arrogance. The tough, untouchable sorority girl act instantly vanished. Brielle's lower lip began to tremble, and her eyes welled up with thick tears. She shifted seamlessly into a desperate manipulative victim act, a tactic she had undoubtedly learned from watching Julian navigate the world. "Please, Chloe," she cried, her voice cracking as tears spilled down her cheeks. "If you do not pay this tuition, they are going to kick me out of my sorority. My friends are already whispering about me behind my back. I will have to move back into that dark house with my dad, and he is losing his mind. He will not even look at me. You cannot just abandon me like this. You are the only mother figure I actually have. I am sorry about the cider. I really am. Just please do not let them kick me out of school." I looked at the tears streaming down her face. A year ago, those tears might have moved me. I might have felt that familiar heavy burden of obligation that society conditions women to carry. I might have reached into my purse, pulled out my corporate checkbook, and bought her conditional love for another semester just to keep the peace in my household. But the woman who would have done that died the exact moment Julian laughed at the dinner table. "I am not your mother, Brielle," I said, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy. "And I am no longer your maid, your personal ATM, or your emotional punching bag. You made it very clear at Thanksgiving exactly where I stand in your hierarchy. You made your bed, and now you have to lie in it. You wanted to be the princess of the castle. I gave you the keys. Now you get to experience what it actually costs to live in the real world when someone else is not quietly paying for your arrogance." Brielle stared at me, the crocodile tears suddenly freezing on her flushed face. She was waiting for the inevitable pivot. She was waiting for the moment I would let out a tired sigh, walk around the kitchen island, and tell her that I was just trying to teach her a tough life lesson before eventually pulling out my checkbook to save her. That was the exact cycle she had perfected with Julian over the years. Scream, cry, play the victim, and collect the financial reward. She firmly believed that my role as a stepmother meant I was required to be an infinite well of forgiveness, a woman who would endure any amount of disrespect simply to maintain the peace in the household. But she was looking at the wrong woman. I did not move a single muscle to comfort her. I just stood there, my posture perfectly straight, completely unfazed by her theatrical performance. "You are actually serious," Brielle whispered, her voice trembling, as the horrifying realization finally sank deeply into her bones. "You are going to let them kick me out of my sorority. You are going to let my entire life fall apart over a stupid glass of cider at dinner." "I did not let your life fall apart, Brielle," I corrected her smoothly, my voice devoid of any warmth. "Your father built your entire life on a foundation of sand and stolen money. I simply stopped pretending it was made of stone." I turned away from her and walked over to the heavy mahogany desk situated near the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse. Earlier this afternoon, while I was finalizing my corporate shipping manifests, I had anticipated this exact visit. I knew the moment her tuition check bounced and the reality of her poverty set in, she would come looking for her human ATM machine. So I had used the hotel business center to print a very specific document. I opened my leather portfolio and pulled out the crisp white stack of stapled papers. I walked back over to the marble kitchen island and placed the document down on the cool surface. I pushed it slowly across the counter until it stopped right at the edge, perfectly aligned with where Brielle was standing. Brielle looked down at the paper. She frowned hastily, wiping a stray tear from her cheek with the back of her hand, and leaned in to read the bold black letters printed at the top of the page. It was a standard entry-level employment application for McDonald's. "What is this?" she asked, her voice instantly dropping her victim act and shifting into a confused, deeply disgusted tone. "This is your new reality," I stated simply, crossing my arms over my chest. "You have a $28,000 university tuition bill due on Monday morning. Your credit cards are maxed out, and your father is entirely bankrupt. Since you are 19 years old and legally an adult, it is time for you to enter the workforce. I checked the local listings this morning. The McDonald's right down the street from your campus is currently hiring shift workers. They pay $15 an hour. If you pick up enough overtime and work the overnight shifts scrubbing the fryers, you might be able to pay off your university debt in about 3 years." Brielle stared at the printed application as if it were a highly venomous snake resting on the marble counter. "You want me to flip burgers?" she shrieked, her voice echoing loudly off the high ceilings of the luxury suite. "I am a pre-law student. I am the vice president of my sorority chapter. I wear designer clothes. I do not work at fast food restaurants. You want to survive in the real world, Brielle?" I fired back, my voice turning to absolute ice and cutting right through her screaming. "Then you roll up your sleeves and you actually work. You sat at my dining table 4 days ago and intentionally dumped your drink on me. You told me to fetch a towel. You called me a maid. You looked down on the very concept of serving others, completely ignorant to the fact that my relentless hard work was the only thing keeping a luxury roof over your head." Brielle opened her mouth to argue, but I did not let her speak. "You think being a maid is an insult?" I continued, my voice echoing with commanding authority. "You think service work is beneath you because you have never had to earn a single dollar in your entire life. Well, the maid is permanently off duty. There is no more free ride. There are no more designer tracksuits, no more fully funded spring break trips to Cabo San Lucas, and no more sweeping your incredibly ugly entitled behavior under the rug. You want money to save your social reputation. You fill out that application and you earn it $15 at a time." The final string holding her sanity together completely snapped. The polished sorority girl facade entirely vanished instantly, replaced by the uncontrollable, blistering rage of a spoiled child being told no for the very first time. Brielle grabbed the McDonald's application off the marble counter and ripped it violently in half. She tore the paper again and again, throwing the shredded pieces into the air and letting them flutter down onto the expensive hardwood floor like pathetic confetti. "You are a bitter, jealous witch, Chloe," she screamed at the top of her lungs, her face contorted in pure, unadulterated fury. "My dad was right about you. You are just trying to ruin us because you know you will never be a real part of this family. I do not need your money. I do not need anything from you. I will get my dad to fix this. He will get the money. He always gets the money." I did not raise my voice to match her frantic screaming. I simply reached over to the wall phone mounted next to the kitchen island and pressed the direct button for the concierge. "Yes, Ms. Chloe. How can I assist you?" The highly professional voice answered immediately. "Please send hotel security up to the penthouse suite," I instructed calmly, keeping my eyes locked on Brielle's furious face. "I have a guest who is refusing to leave and is currently causing a massive disturbance." Brielle gasped, her mouth falling open in sheer shock. "You are calling security on me?" I placed the phone back on the receiver with a soft click. "You have exactly 2 minutes before trained professionals physically escort you out of this building, Brielle. I highly suggest you grab your Louis Vuitton duffel bag and walk to the elevator before you make this even more humiliating for yourself." She let out a primal, frustrated scream, stamping her foot against the floor like a toddler. She grabbed the heavy leather straps of her duffel bag, dragging it forcefully across the room, completely disregarding the expensive wood flooring. She stormed out of the suite, slamming the heavy mahogany door behind her so hard the framed artwork on the walls actually rattled against the plaster. Even through the thick, soundproof walls of the penthouse, I could hear her screaming insults down the entire length of the hallway. I walked over to the security monitor mounted near the door and watched the live feed from the hallway cameras. Brielle was aggressively punching the elevator button, crying hysterically and cursing my name. When the elevator doors finally opened, she dragged her heavy bag inside, ensuring that every single wealthy patron waiting in the lobby downstairs was going to witness her spectacular, humiliating meltdown. I walked back over to the kitchen island and looked at the torn pieces of the job application scattered across the floor. I took my time picking them up, tossing them into the trash can under the sink. I picked up my glass of Pinot Noir and walked back over to the expansive windows. The severance was completely finalized. The fake reality her father had built for her was officially dead. She had marched into my space expecting a bailout, and instead, I had handed her the exact reality check she so desperately needed. As I looked out over the glittering city lights of Atlanta, I knew that the real world was going to handle Brielle exactly the way she deserved, and I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. The weekend passed in a state of absolute uninterrupted peace. For the first time in 3 years, I did not spend my Sunday evening reviewing Julian's credit card statements or quietly transferring funds to cover his exorbitant lifestyle. Instead, I slept deeply in the luxurious silence of my hotel suite, waking up refreshed and ready to conquer the week. But while I was resting, the calendar was steadily turning. Monday arrived, bringing with it the dreaded first of the month. The financial cliff I had pushed Julian toward was no longer a distant threat. It was right under his expensive leather shoes, and gravity was finally taking over. The $12,500 mortgage payment was officially due. I knew exactly what the atmosphere inside that sprawling six-bedroom estate felt like that morning. The air would have been thick with unspoken panic. Julian would have woken up early, his eyes bloodshot from staring at the ceiling all night, fully aware that his personal checking account was practically at zero. He had no corporate safety net. His platinum card was deactivated. His brother Dion had entirely cut him off and forbidden him from ever coming near his family again after the revelation of the stolen college fund. Brielle was likely locked in her bedroom, furious and humiliated, refusing to speak to him after I handed her a fast food job application. Even Mama Estelle, the woman who worshipped the ground he walked on, would be calling him incessantly, demanding to know how he planned to fix the social disaster I had created at the coffee shop. Julian was completely backed into a corner. A rational man in his position would have admitted defeat. A rational man would have called the bank, explained that his financial circumstances had drastically changed, and started the painful process of putting the house on the market to avoid foreclosure. He would have humbly asked his family for forgiveness and looked for a legitimate job. But Julian was not a rational man. Julian was a raging narcissist who had built his entire identity on the illusion of being a wealthy, traditional patriarch. His ego was the most important thing in his universe, far more important than his integrity, his family, or the law. The mere thought of losing that house, of having moving trucks pull up to the gates while his upscale neighbors watched, was a fate worse than death to him. He was absolutely desperate to maintain his image. He needed a massive infusion of cash, and he needed it immediately, not just to pay the past due mortgage, but to prove to everyone that he was still the undisputed king of his castle. So in a state of blind desperation, Julian concocted a reckless and highly illegal plan. He sat in his home office surrounded by custom mahogany bookshelves that I had paid for and looked at the house as his ultimate salvation. He knew properties in our exclusive gated community had skyrocketed in value over the last 3 years. In his mind, there was hundreds of thousands of dollars in untapped equity just sitting in the walls of the estate. He decided the easiest way to solve his immediate cash flow problem, pay off the private loan sharks breathing down his neck and cover his lifestyle for the next year, was to take out a massive second mortgage. He found an aggressive online mortgage lender that promised rapid approvals and fast cash payouts with minimal underwriting. He began filling out the application for a $200,000 home equity line of credit. But he quickly ran into a massive roadblock. Even in his delusional state, Julian knew that the original mortgage documents required both spouses to consent to any new liens placed against a primary residence. He needed my signature. Julian knew there was absolutely no way I would ever agree to sign a document allowing him to pull cash out of a house he did not pay for. He knew I would laugh in his face if he asked. But rather than stop and realize his plan was impossible, his arrogance shifted into high gear. He convinced himself that as my husband he was entitled to that equity. He told himself that I was just being an emotional, vindictive wife who needed to be bypassed for the greater good of the family. He decided to forge my signature on a quitclaim deed. A quitclaim deed is a legal instrument used to quickly transfer interest in real estate. Julian believed that if he forged a document stating that I was willingly relinquishing my rights and interest in the property entirely to him, he could present it to the online lender and secure the second mortgage as the sole owner. He printed the legal forms from the internet. I could easily picture him sitting at his desk, sweating profusely, pulling up an old anniversary card I had written him to meticulously trace my handwriting. He practiced signing my name over and over again on scrap paper until he felt he had perfected the curves and angles of my signature. He found a shady notary public, an old friend from his fraternity days, who was willing to stamp and seal the forged document for a few $100s in cash, completely ignoring the fact that I was not physically present in the room. Julian packaged the fraudulent quitclaim deed along with his application for the massive second mortgage and submitted it to the online bank. He leaned back in his chair, wiping the sweat from his forehead, genuinely believing he had just outsmarted me. He thought he had successfully secured his fake empire and that the cash would be deposited into his account within days. But Julian had made a fatal, catastrophic error. It was an error born entirely out of his deep-seated misogyny and his utter refusal to respect my business acumen. Julian had never actually read the original closing documents when we bought the house 3 years ago. During the closing meeting, he had been too busy drinking the complimentary champagne, taking pictures for social media, and bragging to the real estate agent about his immense success to actually read the paperwork sliding across the conference table. Because we were married, he simply assumed we were buying the house under a standard residential loan as joint tenants. He assumed my name was just listed next to his on the deed like a typical husband and wife. He had absolutely no idea that the massive estate was not in my name at all. It was not in his name either. The property was purchased entirely in cash and was wholly owned by my corporate entity, Apex Logistics LLC. Tuesday morning, I was sitting in my glass-walled office at the logistics headquarters reviewing a supply chain report when my direct office line rang. I glanced at the caller identification. It was my lead corporate attorney. He was a brilliant, meticulous man who handled all the legal structuring for my business empire. I picked up the receiver immediately. "Good morning," I said, leaning back in my leather chair. "Good morning, Chloe," my attorney replied, his tone entirely strictly business with a sharp edge of genuine concern. "We have a very serious situation that requires your immediate attention. I just received a legal verification notice from a commercial underwriter at a national online bank." I set my pen down on the desk. "Go on." "Someone has submitted a loan application attempting to secure a $200,000 second mortgage against your primary residence," he explained, his voice perfectly level. "The applicant submitted a quitclaim deed to the bank this morning, attempting to transfer the ownership of the property to himself to bypass the spousal consent requirements. The applicant is your husband, Julian." I stared out the glass walls of my office, watching the forklifts move across the warehouse floor. I felt a cold, sharp smile slowly spread across my face. He actually did it. He was so desperate to save his fake image that he committed a felony. The online bank ran the property address through the county tax database, my attorney continued. They immediately saw that the property is not owned by you or Julian as individuals, but by Apex Logistics, LLC. Since I am listed as the registered corporate agent for the LLC, The bank's underwriting department flagged the quitclaim deed as highly suspicious and contacted my office directly to verify if the corporate board had authorized the transfer of the asset. Julian had tried to forge a standard residential quitclaim deed for a piece of commercial property owned by a multi-million-dollar corporation. It was the financial equivalent of trying to rob a bank with a water gun. He did not provide the required corporate resolutions, the operating agreement, or the articles of incorporation, because he did not even know they existed. He had blindly walked straight into a massive legal wall. "Chloe, this is textbook mortgage fraud," my attorney stated firmly, his voice cutting through the silence on the phone. "It is a federal offense. Julian has forged your signature and submitted fraudulent legal documents to a financial institution across state lines. I have the power to immediately block this transaction. I can contact the underwriter right now, issue a formal cease and desist, and freeze the entire application before it goes any further. Just give me the word and I will shut this down." I closed my eyes for a brief moment. I thought about the Thanksgiving dinner. I thought about the sticky cider soaking into my silk dress while Julian laughed and told me to grab a towel. I thought about Mama Estelle screaming at me in the coffee shop, calling me a bitter, broken woman while defending a man who stole $40,000 from his own brother's children. I thought about Brielle standing in my penthouse demanding I pay her tuition, because being a maid was my only purpose in life. They had spent years treating me like an uneducated, submissive servant. They believed my only value was the money I quietly slipped into their pockets. They thought I was weak. If I told my attorney to block the transaction right now, Julian would simply get a rejection letter in the mail. The bank would close the file, and Julian would walk away with nothing more than a bruised ego, free to try another manipulative scheme to get his hands on my money. A cease and desist was a slap on the wrist. It was a warning shot. I did not want to fire a warning shot. I wanted to drop a nuclear bomb. "Do not block the transaction," I said, my voice incredibly calm and crystal clear. There was a brief, stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Chloe," my attorney cautioned slowly, making sure I fully understood the gravity of the situation. "If I do not block this and flag the forgery immediately, Julian's application will proceed through the bank's automated processing system. He will formally execute these documents under penalty of perjury." "Exactly," I replied, opening my eyes and looking at the brilliant morning sunlight streaming through my office windows. "If you stop him now, he is just a desperate husband who made a stupid mistake. But if you let him submit those forged documents past the initial underwriter checks and attempt to finalize the closing process, he upgrades a petty family dispute into federal wire fraud and criminal forgery." I could hear the slow realization dawn on my attorney. He knew exactly what kind of woman I was, and he understood perfectly what I was orchestrating. "You want to let him hang himself," he concluded quietly. "I want you to let the application process proceed just far enough to constitute a fully completed criminal act," I instructed, my tone shifting into pure executive command. "Let the bank process the forged deed. Let them schedule the final disbursement. Wait until the absolute last possible second before the wire transfer is initiated. Then and only then you will notify the bank's fraud department and the county sheriff that a man is actively attempting to steal an asset belonging to Apex Logistics, LLC. Consider it done," my attorney replied, his voice reflecting a deep professional respect. "I will monitor the underwriting process closely and prepare the formal fraud affidavits for your signature." I ended the call and placed the phone back on its receiver. The trap was perfectly set. The heavy steel jaws were wide open, and Julian had just willingly placed his head right between them. He thought he was days away from a $200,000 payday that would save his house and his reputation. He was probably planning a massive celebration, eager to show his fraternity brothers and his mother that he was still the undisputed king of the family. I turned back to my computer screen and opened my shipping manifests, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace. I was going to let him throw his party. I was going to let him put on his expensive suit, pour his expensive drinks, and brag to the world about his incredible financial prowess. I was going to let his ego inflate to its absolute maximum capacity. And then I was going to burn his entire fake kingdom to the ground in front of everyone he ever tried to impress. Exactly 2 weeks later, Julian received an automated email notification from the online lender stating that his $200,000 home equity line of credit had passed the initial underwriting phase. My corporate attorney forwarded me the digital trail. The bank had accepted the forged quitclaim deed at face value for the preliminary approval and scheduled the final wire transfer for that upcoming Saturday morning. Julian genuinely believed he had won. He thought he had successfully outsmarted me, secured a massive influx of cash, and saved his crumbling facade. To celebrate his fabricated victory, Julian decided to do exactly what a narcissist does when they think they have regained the upper hand. He threw a party. He sent out digital invitations for a massive catered barbecue at the estate. He invited the entire upscale neighborhood, his old fraternity brothers, and the entire congregation of Mama Estelle's church. He wanted an audience. He wanted to fill the backyard of the house I bought with people who would look at him with envy and respect. He wanted to prove to everyone who had heard the rumors from the coffee shop that I was just a bitter, crazy woman, and that he was still the undisputed wealthy patriarch of his family. I sat in the back of my chauffeured black town car, parked discreetly down the street from the estate that Saturday afternoon, watching the luxury cars line up along the manicured neighborhood streets. Through the tinted windows, I could hear the heavy bass of the R&B music thumping from the backyard. I could smell the rich, smoky scent of the catered barbecue wafting over the iron gates. Inside those gates, the arrogance was at an absolute suffocating, all-time high. Julian was holding court on the expansive stone patio. He was wearing a custom-tailored linen shirt, holding an expensive glass of imported whiskey, and puffing on a thick Cuban cigar. He was laughing loudly, slapping his fraternity brothers on the back, and acting as if he did not have a single care in the world. He was completely oblivious to the fact that the online bank had permanently frozen the wire transfer 3 hours prior, immediately after my attorney submitted the formal fraud affidavits to their federal compliance department. Brielle was parading around the swimming pool like she had just inherited a royal title. She was wearing a brand new, incredibly expensive designer outfit that she had undoubtedly charged to a new credit card Julian had promised to pay off once his loan cleared. She was laughing with her sorority sisters, holding a plastic cup of sparkling cider, and acting as if the McDonald's application I had handed her in the hotel was just a hilarious fever dream. She felt untouchable again. Mama Estelle was sitting in a shaded cabana surrounded by Sister Beatrice and the rest of the church auxiliary board. Estelle was practically glowing with smug satisfaction. She was loudly pointing out the catered food and the beautiful landscaping, telling anyone who would listen how God always protects a righteous traditional black provider from the wicked intentions of a rebellious wife. She was completely convinced that her son had miraculously triumphed over my supposed financial abuse. And then there was Heather. Heather was standing near the outdoor bar, gripping a glass of white wine so tightly her knuckles were completely white. She was forcing a tight, artificial smile for the neighborhood wives desperately trying to keep up appearances. Dayon was nowhere to be seen. When people asked where her husband was, Heather lied smoothly, claiming he was out of town on an urgent business trip. The truth was that Dion had packed his bags, filed for legal separation, and moved into a hotel after discovering Julian had stolen $40,000 from their children. Heather was standing in the middle of a lavish party funded by her own family's financial ruin, forced to swallow her pride because she was too terrified of the social stigma of a public divorce. The stage was perfectly set. The audience was completely captivated by the illusion. At exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Julian decided it was time to address his kingdom. He walked over to the outdoor DJ booth and grabbed the silver microphone. He tapped it twice, the sharp sound echoing over the massive speakers. The music slowly faded out, and the dozens of guests turned their attention to the stone patio. Julian stood at the edge of the steps, looking out over the crowd with a sickeningly arrogant smile. "Thank you all for coming out today to celebrate with my family," Julian announced, his voice booming with fake humility. As you all know, it takes a lot of hard work and sacrifice to build an empire. You have to stay focused. You have to keep your house in order. Sometimes the people you try to uplift will get jealous of your success and try to tear you down. But a strong man does not fold. A strong provider always finds a way to protect his castle and take care of his own. The fraternity brothers cheered, raising their glasses in the air. Mama Estelle clapped her hands together, shouting an enthusiastic amen from the cabana. Julian raised his glass of whiskey high above his head, soaking in the absolute adoration of the crowd. To family, he declared loudly, and to never letting anyone take what belongs to you. Right as the guests raised their cups to echo his toast, a sound completely foreign to the quiet upscale neighborhood violently shattered the atmosphere. It was the heavy, aggressive rumble of massive diesel engines. Julian froze, the whiskey glass hovering in the air. The guests turned their heads toward the front of the house. The heavy iron security gates of the estate, which were programmed to remain open for the party guests, allowed 3 massive vehicles to pull straight through without stopping. 2 giant, industrial-sized moving trucks rumbled up the long circular driveway, their air brakes hissing loudly as they parked directly on the pristine grass. But it was the vehicle leading them that caused the entire backyard to instantly fall into a state of paralyzed shock. It was a marked county sheriff cruiser. The light bar on the roof was flashing a blinding, silent array of red and blue across the expensive cars parked in the driveway. The DJ completely cut the background music. The laughter died instantly. The only sound left in the estate was the idling of the heavy diesel engines and the soft splashing of the swimming pool. 4 burly men in heavy work boots stepped out of the moving trucks carrying thick rolls of industrial trash bags and heavy-duty dollies. 2 uniformed sheriff deputies stepped out of the cruiser, their hands resting casually on their utility belts. They walked straight up the driveway and bypassed the front door, heading directly for the wooden side gate that led into the crowded backyard. I stepped out of my sleek black town car right behind them. I was wearing a tailored crimson-red power suit that stood out brilliantly against the manicured green lawn. I adjusted my designer sunglasses, grabbed my leather portfolio from the back seat, and followed the deputies through the wooden gate and onto the stone patio. The moment Julian saw me walking behind the police officers, all the color instantly violently drained from his face. His jaw dropped. The expensive crystal whiskey glass slipped from his trembling fingers and shattered into 100 pieces against the stone patio, splashing brown liquor all over his custom linen shoes. He panicked. His survival instinct kicked in, and he desperately tried to play the alpha male in front of his frozen audience. "What the hell is this?" Julian shouted, his voice cracking horribly as he pointed a shaking finger at me. "Officers, this woman is a bitter ex-wife. She does not live here anymore. She is trespassing on my private property. I want her removed immediately." The lead sheriff deputy did not even look at him. He stopped at the edge of the patio, scanning the massive crowd of guests. "Are you Julian?" the deputy asked, his voice projecting with undeniable, terrifying authority. "Yes, I am Julian," he barked back, trying to puff out his chest. "And I demand that you arrest this woman for trespassing." I walked calmly past the deputy and stopped right in front of Julian. I looked at his sweating face, then looked out at the massive crowd of people staring at us in absolute breathless silence. Mama Estelle had her hand over her heart, looking like she was about to faint. Heather was backing slowly away into the shadows of the cabana. Brielle was standing frozen by the pool, her plastic cup of cider crushed in her fist. I unzipped my leather portfolio and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. I handed the top 2 pages directly to the sheriff deputy. "Officer," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent backyard. "This is the certified corporate deed proving that this entire property is wholly owned by Apex Logistics, LLC. I am the sole chief executive officer of that company, and this is the federal fraud warrant issued this morning by the district attorney." The deputy reviewed the documents for 2 seconds, nodded, and turned his cold gaze back to Julian. Julian stumbled backward, tripping over the shattered glass on the patio. "Wait," he pleaded, holding his hands up. "There is a mistake. I am the husband. I own this house. I was just approved for a loan. The money is coming today." I turned away from him and faced the crowd. I looked directly at the church congregation, the fraternity brothers, and Mama Estelle. Julian did not get approved for a loan, I announced, delivering the ultimate devastating kill shot to his entire fake reality. Julian forged my signature on a legal quitclaim deed to try and steal a $200,000 equity line against a corporate asset he does not own. He did this because he has not paid the mortgage on this house in 60 days. He has been entirely bankrupt for 2 years. The collective gasp from the crowd was incredibly loud. People started whispering frantically. Mama Estelle let out a loud wail, sinking into her cabana chair. I continued, turning my head slightly to look at him out of the corner of my eye. "The bank did not foreclose on you. I evicted you." The lead deputy stepped forward, grabbing Julian roughly by his custom linen shirt. Julian did not fight back. He went completely limp. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed perfectly over the patio. "You are under arrest for felony mortgage fraud and criminal forgery," the deputy recited, calmly spinning Julian around and marching him directly through the crowd of his horrified guests. As Julian was paraded away in handcuffs, the eviction crew immediately went to work. The 4 men from the moving trucks bypassed the patio and walked straight through the sliding glass doors into the house. A minute later, the reality of the eviction hit the backyard. Brielle let out a blood-curdling shriek as one of the movers walked out the back door, carrying a massive clear industrial trash bag. Stuffed inside the bag, completely wrinkled and ruined, were her expensive designer dresses, her luxury handbags, and the shoes she had bought just yesterday. The mover walked over to the edge of the lawn and tossed the bag carelessly onto the grass like a sack of yard waste. "Stop it!" Brielle screamed, dropping her drink and running across the lawn to grab the plastic bag. "Those are my things. You cannot do this. Daddy, tell them to stop." But her daddy was already being pushed into the back of the marked police cruiser. Her daddy was a convicted fraud who could not save her anymore. I watched as the guests slowly started to panic and realized they were standing in the middle of an active crime scene and a forced eviction. The fraternity brothers quickly set their plates down and practically ran toward their cars. The church ladies surrounded Mama Estelle, who was crying hysterically, and guided her quickly out of the yard. Heather did not say a single word. She kept her head entirely down, slipping out through the side gate without looking at anyone, walking away to face her own ruined marriage. I stood on the stone patio of my property, watching the movers carry box after box of Julian's pathetic fake life out onto the driveway. The R&B music was gone. The arrogant boasting was gone. The only sound left was the beautiful, peaceful silence of a parasite being permanently removed from my empire. Fast forward exactly 6 months. The spectacular dust cloud from the explosive backyard barbecue has completely settled, and the heavy, unforgiving hand of reality has dealt with every single one of them. Julian did not get to walk away with just a bruised ego this time. He is currently out on bail, but his freedom is entirely temporary. His wealthy fraternity brothers, the same men who happily drank his expensive whiskey and ate his catered food, completely vanished the second the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Not a single one of them offered to post his bond. Mama Estelle had to drain her entire meager retirement savings just to get him out of the county jail. He is now awaiting his federal fraud trial, living in Mama Estelle's cramped, damp basement. He sleeps on a squeaky, twin-sized mattress, positioned right next to an old water heater. There are no more custom-tailored linen suits. There are no more lavish steakhouse lunches or country club memberships. His so-called consulting firm was officially dissolved by the state for failure to pay basic operational taxes. He spends his days sitting on a folding chair, meeting with an overworked court-appointed public defender because he absolutely cannot afford a private criminal defense attorney. The arrogant alpha patriarch, who laughed at me from the head of his table, is now a terrified broken man, staring down the barrel of a multi-year federal prison sentence. Brielle received a reality check that was equally devastating. Without my corporate account to fund her sorority lifestyle, the university followed through on their threat. She was administratively withdrawn from all her classes just 3 days after the barbecue. She had to pack up her luxurious dorm room and move back to Atlanta. She is currently working the afternoon shift at the drive-through window of the exact same fast food restaurant I handed her the application for. She wears a stiff polyester uniform that perpetually smells of hot frying oil, standing on her feet for 8 hours a day, forced to politely smile at customers who treat her like she is invisible. She works grueling double shifts just to make the minimum monthly payments on her massive maxed-out credit cards. The ultimate poetic justice happened last month when a car full of her former sorority sisters pulled up to her drive-through window on their way to a party. They saw her standing there in her headset and grease-stained shirt. They did not invite her. They just took their food, offered her a look of devastating pity, and drove away. Her entire social reputation on campus evaporated overnight, and she finally understands exactly how hard it is to earn a single dollar in the real world. Dayon was the only member of that family who actually salvaged his dignity, but he had to burn his entire marriage to the ground to do it. He formally filed for divorce from Heather just 2 weeks after discovering the truth about his stolen college funds. He took full custody of their 2 children and moved into a modest, affordable apartment on the other side of the city. He completely cut ties with his brother and his mother, finally recognizing the deep toxicity that had infected his family tree. Heather, on the other hand, got absolutely nothing in the divorce settlement. Stripped of the fake prestige and the unearned wealth she clung to so desperately, she found herself completely isolated. The affluent country club wives she used to gossip with now cross the street when they see her coming. Mama Estelle's church congregation. The exact same people Heather tried to maliciously weaponize against me on social media entirely turned their backs on her. They saw her true colors and they exiled her from their social circles. She is currently renting a tiny rundown studio apartment, completely ignored and forgotten by the community she spent years trying to manipulate. As for me, I am standing on the sweeping glass balcony of my newly purchased ultra-modern penthouse, overlooking the glittering Atlanta skyline. The sun is just starting to set, painting the evening clouds in brilliant shades of gold violet and deep crimson. The city lights are beginning to flicker on, stretching out beneath me like a massive ocean of diamonds. I am sipping a glass of real vintage French champagne from a crystal flute, feeling a level of absolute profound peace that I have never known before. The air up here is crisp and clean, completely untainted by the heavy, suffocating lies I lived in for 3 years. I lean against the glass railing and reflect on the absolute truth of my journey. They fully expected me to shrink. They demanded that I play the submissive quiet maid just so their incredibly fragile egos could stand tall. They wanted me to endure their disrespect, their thinly veiled microaggressions, and their relentless financial parasitism, simply because society conditioned them to believe that a highly successful Black woman should be desperately grateful to have any man claim her. They thought the mere title of being a wife was enough to keep me locked in chains. They genuinely believed that I would sacrifice my dignity, my hard-earned wealth, and my own mental health just to maintain the illusion of a perfect family photo at Thanksgiving. But losing that toxic family was not a tragedy. It was the absolute greatest emotional and financial upgrade of my entire life. My logistics empire has expanded its operations and doubled its revenue in the last 6 months now that I am no longer bleeding corporate capital to silently fund a fake king. I am no longer paying for luxury car leases or bailing out bankrupt consulting firms. My physical health has drastically improved. The constant heavy anxiety that used to sit right in the center of my chest every time I walked through the doors of that 6-bedroom estate has completely vanished. I sleep soundly through the night. I wake up every single morning feeling energized, powerful, and entirely in control of my own destiny. I built a beautiful, authentic life with my own two bare hands, and I will never again allow another human being to make me feel small inside the kingdom that I built. I take a slow, satisfying sip of my champagne and look directly at you, the audience. I want you to hear this loud and clear. They expected me to break under their weight, but they completely forgot who poured the concrete for the foundation. You do not owe your success to people who refuse to respect your boundaries. You do not owe your peace to family members who view you as nothing more than a human ATM machine. The thing about carrying dead weight is once you finally drop it, you realize just how fast you can fly. Have you ever had to evict a parasite from your life to protect your peace? Let me know in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you believe in protecting your empire at all costs. Never apologize for demanding exactly what you are worth.